For some context, I'm 17 and my parents, they've been split up since I was around 4 years old. My mother lives in town right next to my school, so I stay at her house during the week and go to my dad's house on the weekends. Now that summer has started, I'm at my dad's a lot more and I'm starting to notice these instances happening more frequently. Now, my dad lives about 20 minutes outside of my town in the middle of pretty much nowhere. Like, I'm talking that we are the only house on our street. He bought this house around 2 years ago and we had an interesting experience quite literally the day that we moved in. The house is outside of a very small town with only one restaurant. So the day that we moved in, we thought that we would go and try it out as it would be the only place to get takeout in this area. The second that we go in and sit down, our waitress somehow clocks that we're new to the area and asks what brings us into town. We told her that we had just moved into a place nearby and gave her the road number. She immediately said, "Oh, the old red house," and says the address. Shocked, we tell her yes and asked how she knew that. She said that she used to live in that same house a while back with her husband, but sadly that he had lost his battle with depression and she had to move out. We gave our condolences and we ordered our food. Later, when she came back to the table, she mentioned that near the end of her husband's life, when things had gotten too bad, she would leave little notes around the house to remind him that she loved him. We thought that it was really sweet and carried on a short conversation with her, ate our food, and then we left. When we got back to the house, I started to look around to get used to the place, and when I walked out into the shop in the back of the garage, I noticed a little heart drawn on the door with the words Jack and Jody written inside of it. I showed my dad and he took a picture of it. We drove back to the restaurant and showed it to her and assured her that we would leave it alone and wouldn't get rid of it. She started crying and she gave my dad a hug, and that was that. After that, we went back to the restaurant plenty of times and quite literally never saw her again. Whether it was a chance encounter or something else, I'm really not sure, but that was the most tame experience to come out of moving into this house. Now, to clarify, the inside of the house isn't the problem. It's actually the outside. My dad and I both have mentioned that we do feel a presence in the house, but it's not anything scary or malicious. Matter of fact, it's sort of a calming presence and seems to be protective of the house if anything, whereas outside of the house is truly terrifying. I began to notice that I would get a really bad gut feeling anytime that I was out there alone during the nighttime, which is a lot given my dad works from like 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. There are 2 windows in the house that don't have drapes, and whenever I would be near them, I could feel eyes on me from outside. But I didn't start seriously worrying about all these things until one day at around 8 p.m. while my dad was at work. I was home alone watching TV with the dog like usual, until she jolted up off of the sofa and began barking like crazy. I followed her to see what the deal was, and she ran straight to the door and started losing it, quite literally shaking and foaming at the mouth. Mind you, my dog is very friendly and chill, so I was really confused as to what her problem was. But then I heard knocking. Loud, intentional knocking. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we live in a place that is so secluded that it is literally impossible to accidentally stumble upon our house. I was confused about who would be at our house at this hour, given my dad is never home at this time. And then I heard talking. Something that sounded exactly like me began to talk as it continued to knock on the door. "Hey dude, it's me, let me in. I don't know where my key is, man, open the door." I have never been more horrified in my entire life. Hearing my own voice call out to me genuinely shook me to my core. I stood there frozen for a solid 30 seconds before grabbing the dog and literally dragging her away from the door. That night, I hid in my room with the volume on my TV all the way up until it stopped, and even then, I didn't leave my room. This was just one more severe instance, I guess you could say. But on the more tame end of things, it's common to hear tapping on windows, random thumping outside, and odd vocal sounding noises once it's gotten dark out. It feels like whatever is out there is desperately trying to find a way inside of this house. I consulted a friend of mine who works at a holistic store, and she recommended that I put selenite on top of each doorway that leads outside of the home and black tourmaline on all four corners of the house, and so I did both. I still hear things like this outside and have heard knocking on the door since then, but never anything inside of the home, which genuinely I'm grateful for. So, does anyone know what this might be, or better yet, what I can do about it? So to my knowledge, this photo is completely unedited. It was taken with a film camera, and since then, it was simply just uploaded digitally. This picture was taken by my mother in 1999, I believe. It was at a park in New Jersey, and you can actually see the World Trade Center across the river in the background. The child in the picture, that's my brother, who I covered for privacy. But she disposed of the physical copy in the negative due to the belief of it having some sort of bad energy attached to it. She had told me about it, but she could never really show me. Although the physical copy was gone, she had sworn that she had uploaded it digitally somewhere. And after years of trying to somehow dig it up, we finally found it. Now, for context, she said that there was nobody else at the park at the time. Apparently, my brother had been acting strange too, and really out of character. He would come up to her, crying for what seemed like no reason at all, and when she finally had the film processed, you could imagine that she almost had a heart attack when she saw it. I've tried to do my own digging to see if there had been any kind of sightings in this area, but since then this park appears to be gone. I find it pretty strange though, just looking at the photo, that this figure is staring right at the camera, it seems. Let's assume that there was somebody else at the park, like another mum. I mean, why would she be staring at my mum's camera? Why can't you see any other children in the background? I've tried to just chalk it up to it being motion blur, but it's strange that you can see my brother walking across the playground and he is completely clear. As far as this figure goes, it's hard to really make out anything of it. It honestly looks almost like a Halloween mask. Other than that, it just looks humanoid with long hair, holding something like a jacket maybe. This photo really stunted my family for a while, and I want to see if anybody here can make anything of it. So what do you guys think? Motion blur? Ghost? Demon? What are your thoughts? I was visiting my grandfather for some sort of family get-together or cookout when I was around 9 years old. This took place so long ago that it's difficult to remember some details, but I'll try my best. My grandfather lives a few states away from us and is about a 2-hour drive from our home. My father and we drove up, saw our family, and we had a really great time. For a bit of background too, my grandpa lives in a very small town. I believe it's actually considered a village, to be honest. So small, in fact, that everyone really knows one another. My father and his brothers all grew up in this town too and are very familiar with it. So, once the function was over and we were ready to head home, we stopped at one of the local gas stations to fuel up for the 2-hour drive back. As we were walking into the gas station to get some beverages and snacks for the road, I immediately clocked this guy who was walking out as we were walking in. I still remember exactly what he looked like. He was about 5'10", same height as my dad, had shaggy hair and a 5 o'clock shadow, was wearing a white tank top and black basketball shorts, and bright red sneakers. My dad and I walked past him and into the gas station, and I noticed a display with light-up fidget spinners up front near the register. This was during the fidget spinner craze. It was only $3, so I asked my dad if I could have one. Trying to teach me the principle of working for the things that you want, my dad told me that if I went out to the car and cleaned out all the trash, a few empty water bottles and candy wrappers, that he would get me one. It would only be about a 30-second task, so I jumped on the offer. I agreed and went to walk out to the car while he grabbed our snacks and drinks. Now, as soon as I stepped outside of the gas station and the door closed behind me, a navy blue minivan pulled up, driven by the same man that I had seen while we were walking in, and he stopped right in front of me with his window rolled down. I assumed at first that he had stopped so that I could cross the little driveway area to get to my car, and I wanted to be polite, so I waved him along, indicating that he could cross first. He then used his pointer finger to gesture towards me, telling me to come to him. Being young and wanting to assume the best, I thought that he was still waving me across. So I said out loud, "Oh, no, it's okay, you can go ahead," and waved him along once more. That's when he said, "No, come here," and began opening his car door. That's when I realized that he was trying to get me to go into his car. I panicked and screamed, something along the lines of "heck no," and immediately turned around and ran back inside of the gas station. I began to grow more panicked once I got back inside the gas station. My father was up front by the register when I walked out, but now he was nowhere to be seen. So I literally screamed for him at the top of my lungs, gaining the attention of the other people in the gas station. My dad, he came running from the back end of the gas station where the drink coolers were and asked me what was wrong. I explained the situation to him in between sobs, as I was so shaken up at this point that I began to cry. The man at the register, he called the police. They eventually showed up and had me give a description of the man and his vehicle, as well as an official statement. Coincidentally too, the police officer that I gave my statement to, he used to be my father's babysitter when he was a kid, so he was really nice and patient with me, thankfully. I'm sure my statement wasn't the most coherent given that I was like 9 years old, but they ended up finding the guy and they arrested him. Not because of the kidnap attempt, but because he had been cooking meth in his house apparently. I'm not sure what happened as far as a trial or jail time because we never did get updated on the guy beyond that. This happened quite a long time ago, and we sometimes still stop at this gas station when coming back from family functions at my grandfather's house, and to this day I still get anxious whenever I go in there. I was outside with my dog Denny before I fed her this evening, around 9 p.m. We were staying at an RV park in the desert of Arizona. There's an empty field to the north of the park. Now, over the past couple of years, I've been hearing this weird, whirring sound out in the desert that's kind of hard to place. It sounds synthetic, not like anything an animal or an insect would make. It moves around, so it's not a generator. It's also followed me between different campgrounds, almost like a hitchhiker, in fact. As I'm sitting outside waiting on my dog to finish, that whirring noise started up, off in the distance. It sounded like it was coming from that empty field to the north. I was immediately uneasy about this. It was the first time that I've heard it outside of a campground around town. First time that I had ever heard it in town, in fact. I hadn't heard it in weeks at this stage, but as soon as I did, I felt like it found me. I was more right than I thought too, unfortunately, because it stopped after about 5 to 10 minutes, and I brought Danny back in to feed her, then decided to take her for a bit of a walk. Leaving the park, we take a left down to the corner, then turn left again. That street that we turned onto is running along the backside of that field that the sound was coming from, and it's about a quarter mile from the camper, I would guess. There's not much moonlight, so the flashlight is providing most of our light. The field is on the left, and there's just empty desert to our right. There's another street about a half a mile down. We're maybe a third of the way down to it when Danny stops dead in her tracks. She turns to face the left side of the road with her ears up, facing that field. So I point the flashlight in that direction, expecting to see a coyote or a wildcat or something. Walking out of the bushes next to the road, though, is what at first looks like a man stumbling up the road on 2 feet, almost like he was drunk. I almost immediately noticed that something was off. That was not a man. It had no clothes, no shoes, and also no head. And it's still stumbling forward, swaying its arms in a strange way, almost like watching someone trying to walk through deep snow and maintain their balance. Its skin looks deep brown and shiny, almost like it had been rotisseried, but with dark patches like it had been burned a little bit, which quite honestly is pretty fitting because even though it had human-like legs and arms, its torso looked closer to a chicken's or a turkey's, but sort of upside down. Not an exact description, but it's genuinely the closest one that I have. I honestly had trouble processing what the heck I was even seeing, so my description might be a bit off, but that's the best that I can do. In any case, mid-stride, it put one leg forward, awkwardly, and sort of bends over the waist like 90 degrees, arms spread out in a theater-like bow, probably about 15 to 20 feet away, and somehow completely silent the whole time. I didn't hear it stepping on the ground. I didn't hear the bushes it seemed to have brushed against. Audibly, it might as well have not even been there. Beyond looking at it, I don't remember my dog making a sound either. Well, I immediately started screaming, involuntary and at the top of my lungs. Honestly, too, the screams were out before I even knew that I was going to scream. This thing, though, it doesn't turn towards me. In fact, it doesn't even flinch. It remains frozen in place. I turn and I start sprinting down the street, still screaming at the top of my lungs, uncontrollably now, turning back with the flashlight every few steps just to make sure that it wasn't following me. Eventually, I lost sight of it, but I still kept looking back the whole way down the street. I didn't stop running until I get to the next intersection. That's whereabout I was able to stop screaming too. I have never in my life been terrified to the point that I started screaming uncontrollably like that. This whole experience was completely outside of my frame of reference, and I think I just sort of lost control. No way in heck was I going to go back past it, so we had to go the long way around. Anxiety is at like an 11 the whole way back. I'm constantly checking in all directions with the flashlight, just to make sure that whatever the heck that actually was didn't sneak up on me. We had to walk along 2 more streets just to get back to the trailer, and man, was that the longest walk of my life that I have ever had. I have no idea what in the actual heck to do with this, at all. It seems like it came from roughly where I heard that whirring noise coming from. It definitely came from the same field, at least. Like it came out to meet me almost and introduce itself. Like that's what it was bowing for or something. I'm terrified by the possibilities that this suggests, but Danny saw it first, and I really wish that she hadn't. It would have been easy to just write this off as a hallucination otherwise, and quite honestly, I would probably prefer that. But it got even weirder though. By the time that I hit the next street after I started running, which I didn't take long, my flashlight had turned pink. The beam itself had turned pink. It's normally white, and I assumed that I had messed it up or something while running, so I said to heck with it and I just kept walking quickly. But that's when I started noticing pink streetlights on the way back too. I didn't give it too much thought at the time. I was way too busy trying to keep an eye out to process it, I guess, but thinking back on it, it was weird. In any case, I got back to the street the RV is parked on and I turned left. And that was when I noticed the moon. It too was pink. In fact, every light source that I could see was now pink. I started really freaking out at this stage. I mean, first, I only thought that I had been abducted and wasn't really experiencing what I thought I was, simulation or screen memory and just messed up settings or whatever, but now seeing this, it definitely was weird. I got all the way back to the camper, got inside, and I called one of my friends over Signal. And it kept messing up too, no matter who I called. There was no audio for either of us, even though the calls were definitely going through. My anxiety peaked at this point, higher than it's ever been in my life. I just started saying none of this can be real. Every light was still pink too, and even inside of my trailer it was pink. It was surreal to say the least. I sent my friend my phone number and had her call directly. When the phone rang, I picked up and she was there, and I just completely lost it. I started bawling, and I've just never in my life felt such relief to hear somebody else's voice. Honestly, too, I really wish that I hadn't seen that. Even if it's not what has been making that sound, there's just no way in heck that I want to be associated with that sound now, because it definitely feels connected. I mean, it came from that field. It's probably worth pointing out too that we left the camper at around 9. We didn't go back until around 10:15, and the path that we took usually is about a 30-minute walk at most. So that means that I have about 45 minutes or so of just completely unaccounted time. We lived on the east side of Ontario, OR. The school was on the west side, and it will be relevant later on. We had to cross the tracks to get to school or go under them, depending on which route you chose. Either way, they were creepy. But, I mean, most train tracks are a little bit creepy, right? Well, one way across the tracks passed by some old silos. I don't know what they held when they were still in use, but at this stage, they were no longer functional. My older brother, Frank, some of our cousins, and friends started to sort of become obsessed with them too. They always joked about going into them, and I always told them that that was a really bad idea. But I mean, teenage boys and bad ideas usually go hand in hand, right? And I mean, sure, I was obsessed with the paranormal and ghosts, but these silos, they were just a no-go for me. And one night, during summer break, two of my cousins, a friend of ours, my brother and I, we were hanging out in the creepy park behind or beside the apartments. As teenagers want to do, we decided to play Truth or Dare at some stage. Stupidest idea that we could have come up with that night. Everything started benign, I guess, as most games of Truth or Dare do, but then my brother and our cousins and our friend decided that I was being too benign in the dares that I would take. So they all decided that they would double dare me to go into the silos. Now, something you need to understand about me is that I don't like being told what to do. So I said that if I had to go to the silos, then they would have to go into them too. They didn't find that as funny, but decided that if I was going to go to the silos, that they would go into them as well. So off we went. The closer that we got to the silos, the more that I regretted telling them that they had to go into them. My brothers, our male cousin that was with us, and two of our male friends, they started getting really excited about going into these silos. I tried to convince them that they didn't have to, but they were adamant that they were going to. I tried and tried harder and harder to convince them not to, but our female cousin started taking my side. The boys, however, were adamant that nothing bad would happen to them. I certainly was not convinced. In any case, we finally got across the tracks into the silos. My brother and the rest of the idiot boys climbed up into the silos. My last plea to them was to be careful. My female cousin and I stayed as close to the silos as I would go. We could hear the boys laughing and being boys. They shouted back that they were going to try and find a way to the top, which I was adamantly against them doing so. My cousin and I looked up at the walkway between them at the top, watching to see if they got up there. We couldn't hear them any longer, and honestly, I was starting to freak out a bit. I called out to them as I saw a dark cloud from above the silos. I kept my eyes on them and started screaming for them to get the heck out of there now. And that was when I noticed a figure come out onto the walkway from the silo that the boys were in. I literally screamed at whoever was up there to get the heck down from there, that it wasn't safe. That's when my cousin tugged on my sleeve and pointed to the door that the boys had gone through. They were now all coming in our direction. I looked back up and saw the figure move to the other silo. Someone was up there, of that I was sure, but it wasn't any of the boys. When the boys rejoined us, they were all laughing like it was nothing, and I asked if any of them had made it to the top of the silo, and they said that they had tried, but the stairs leading up there were rotted out for about a quarter of the way up, so there was really no way to get up, and so that meant that there was no way that I saw any of them up there. To this day, they all claim that there was nobody else in there with them, and most refuse to believe that I saw anyone up there, but I know what I saw, and I know for a fact that someone or something was up there on that walkway. Today, I honestly had one of the best days of my life. Things have really turned around for me, and I was in a great mood. I also love thrift shopping, so I decided to stop at Goodwill. While I was in the houseware aisle, I had the feeling that someone was watching me, so I turned around and there was only one other person in the aisle at this very crowded Goodwill. She appeared to be between the ages of like 18 and 25. She was very pale with dark hair and dressed all in black. She didn't have anything in her hands and she was not holding a purse. And the weirdest thing was that she also wasn't looking at anything, except for me. Her eyes were incredibly dark. I was immediately uncomfortable. My first thought was, what is she doing here? She doesn't belong here. Then, every cell of my body propelled me away from her at lightning speed. This is when the thing that really bothers me happened. I walked away from her with my cart, and then I turned my head and she was suddenly beside me, just across the aisle. It was like she had teleported. It scared me half to death, and it was then that I decided to leave. As I was going to leave the store, my niece and her family happened to walk in. I swear that we don't have family reunions at Goodwill. This was a day of such strange coincidences, but I spoke to them briefly and then I left. The woman, she had scared me, so I decided that I was just not going to think about it anymore. I went about the rest of my day like normal until maybe about an hour ago when my cell phone rang. It was my niece's husband, but the call wouldn't connect. That's not super unusual because I live in the woods, so I tried to call him on my home phone and that wouldn't connect either, and that was a little bit unusual. That's when I received a text from him that said, "Hey, really odd, I know, but do you remember a young woman dressed in black, sort of emo style at the Goodwill today? Maybe 18 to 25 or so?" I had chills all over as soon as I read that, and I was instantly, viscerally terrified. I knew that he had seen her too, and I tried to call again, and this time the call went through. And he had the exact same experience that I had. The soulless yet soul-staring look, the teleporting, the dread and the desire to get away from her. He's a full-grown adult man with a full-time job and a family, and he typically would not be afraid of a random woman at Goodwill. I feel like it's important to mention here too that my niece, she never saw her and thought that her husband was crazy until I confirmed the story. I really don't know what I saw, to be honest. I don't know why my niece's husband saw it too, but she didn't. I don't know why it frightened us both so badly, but I shut all my curtains and blinds that night. I locked all of my doors and I lit some candles and asked for protection. I've been shaking and, I'm 50 years old and I'm scared like a child. Psychological disorders run rampant in my family. Schizophrenia, sociopathy, narcissism, depression, intermittent explosive disorder, etc. As you can imagine, being the youngest of four, I received my unfair share of beatings and beratings from all members of my family. It was a toxic environment for sure, but the worst culprit was the next youngest, my brother, whom I'll refer to as N. N's first episode that I can recall happened when I was about 4, maybe 5, making him 7 or 8 at the time. My elder sibling B was babysitting the rest of us while my parents were out shopping one day. I don't remember what started the argument, but it had to be something innocuous. What does a 7-year-old have to get so angry about, right? But N pulled a knife from the kitchen knife block, and it wasn't the empty threat of a petulant child, but the real danger of a madman. He fully intended to kill B, which would have solved a different kind of felon problem, but that's a tale for another day. He was only stopped by the incomprehensibly lucky timing of my parents walking in the door at that moment, returning from the grocery store. My father, being in the military, was able to easily overpower and disarm him. Fast forward a few years, N was in his teens and had gotten really into two things: exercise and drugs. He began terrorizing not just the household but the city at this stage. By this time, my father was the only one able to overpower him, but he was often TDY to the Middle East as one of the best Arabic linguists on the planet, so there was really no one to stop N. And worse, my mother, she was an enabler. She would just give him money for drugs because she was so afraid of him. Household bills went unpaid because she was fueling his drug habit, either out of fear or incompetence, but one day she had no money, but I did. You see, I'd been mowing neighbors' lawns for like $15 a pop, trying to save up for something. N wanted his fix and I was standing in his way, so I knew to get out of the house, and my friends had been over, so we all left and started walking down the road to get away. But my brother and his gang decided that they weren't going to let me off that easily that day. He followed me on his bike, and despite my efforts to get away, he ran me over. I rolled what had to have been at least 150 feet before coming to a stop. N didn't pursue at that point, having gotten a laugh at my own expense, I suppose, but my friends, they picked me up and took me to the nearest friend's house. I really wasn't feeling well after what had happened, so I sort of just sat to the side while my friends occupied themselves on a trampoline. About 10 minutes later, one of N's gang friends came into the backyard and picked me up. I didn't even have any fight left in me at that point, and he sort of just body slammed me anyway. But what happened next was so unbelievable that even he just booked it out of there. The unwell feeling that I'd been having after being run over was apparently internal bleeding in my face, and the body slam caused my skin to burst in several places, relieving the pressure. So, despite suddenly bleeding from about 7 random spots on my face, I actually felt a little bit better. But years of this torment went on. My brother getting kicked out and going to juvie multiple times, then coming back with some sob story about how he'd changed. My mother would just eat it up and let him back in over and over. My father had retired in the meantime, but being such a good linguist, he was taking contract jobs overseas, so he was still never really home. B was always locked in his room being a creep. My sister was way smaller than N and stayed away from him, and my mother, being terrified of him, left me as the last target for cruelty. And so I literally spent years getting the stuffing kicked out of me. But time, as it tends to, went on, and eventually I grew and became a man. I graduated high school, moved out with my friends, and got into fitness myself. I was also the only member of my family to start getting treatment for my psychological disorders. Like I said, they run in the family, and I wasn't an exception. Which brings us to the July 4th in question, July 4th of 2005. I was 19 and N was 22. B had finally moved out, my sister had long since left, and my father was once again overseas. My mother was alone in her house for the first time ever, so I decided to drop in to keep her company one day. Little did I know that Anne had begged her for money and was expected any minute. My mother insisted that we try to get along, but Anne was already high on something, probably meth, as that was his drug of choice. Oh, quite honestly, he would do anything that he could get his hands on, really. At some point, though, he was in the kitchen trying to serve himself ice cream using a regular spoon, and I said to him, "Use an ice cream scoop so you don't bend the spoon." And that sentence was enough to set him off, apparently, but he decided to bide his time. He came back to the living room with his ice cream and sat next to me on the couch. I was wary but didn't do anything, and after he finished his ice cream, he started in on me, saying things like, "You don't tell me what to do, and who do you think you are?" And at some point I replied, I don't really remember what I said, but it was the straw that really broke the camel's back, because he jumped up and pulled a 9mm, pointing it straight at my face. This is where I count myself lucky too. Had I complained about him sitting so near, or had he moved away, he would have had plenty of time to shoot me. But since I was so close, I was able to leap to my feet and grab his hand with the gun, forcing it upwards so if he squeezed the trigger, he'd just blow holes in the roof. And so, from the time that he leapt up to the time that I had the barrel redirected, barely a second had passed. And now the struggle ensued. We both wanted control of the gun, and I was using both hands, but he had the pistol grip, making it easy enough for him to maintain primary control with just one hand, freeing up his other hand to punch me in the face. But, to my utter astonishment, it didn't hurt. I don't mean that adrenaline kept me from feeling the pain or anything. I mean, it didn't even hurt a little bit, because apparently prolonged drug use had really weakened Anne, while I had been getting fitter and stronger. And as soon as I realized that he couldn't hurt me, a wicked smile suddenly crossed my face. Now I knew that if I got hold of that gun, I could be rid of him forever. And in the heat of that moment, it absolutely would have been self-defense. Anne must have registered that smile, because suddenly he switched from trying to kill me to trying to escape. He managed to break free of my grip and bolted out of the house faster than you could believe. I dialed 911 and told them what had happened, letting them know that there was a felon on the loose with a gun. Anne must have heard the sirens, because a few minutes passed and he ran back inside and he looked at me and said, "You didn't really call the cops, did you?" I very calmly replied, "Of course I did." Now he was panicking, and it was at this moment that the tough guy act broke. I could hear the tears in his voice. He said that he couldn't go back to prison, that he'll get right this time. The gun in his waistband completely forgotten in his panic. He could have easily started a hostage situation with me and my mother, but he didn't. And here I spoke the last word to Anne that he'll ever see on my lips. Run. I spoke it like a command, and for the first time ever, he actually listened. He was at that door again. The cops arrived and took my statement, and since he was a felon known to be armed, dozens of cops were out there looking for him, armed with AK-47s even. It took them a few hours, but eventually they did find him hiding in some bushes and took him into custody without incident. He pled guilty, and so there wasn't even a trial. He got 5 years in federal prison. Honestly too, I don't know what it was that raised the charges from state to federal, but He spent most of his sentence in Florida instead of Texas, and when he got out, he really just stayed there. Now, 20 years later, more than half my lifetime since I have had any interaction with him, I still do not forgive him. So I got to work this morning and began unloading and loading cargo into the back of my truck. It's very dark in my workspace, so much so that I have to wear a headlamp to read labels in the loading area because the lights are not very bright in my workspace. It gets bright during the day, obviously, and it's very silent, and I'm the only person who starts here at like 4 a.m. So this morning, at roughly 4:15, I stopped loading my cargo to send my boss a quick text message, and something literally loudly hissed in my ear, and I actually felt warm air on my neck. I freaked out and probably looked ridiculous if the security cameras caught it because I was backing up quickly and spinning in circles trying to see whatever it was. I flinched so hard, in fact, that I think I gave myself a bit of slight whiplash or something. Then I immediately ran outside to my car and I waited for my coworker to come in about an hour later so I wouldn't be alone. And I even debated leaving work that day. I'm on my lunch break now sharing this, and when my coworker saw me outside when he arrived, I just told him that I felt a bit sick and needed to come outside for a few minutes. Quite honestly though, I'm totally freaked out and I don't want to go back in to work tomorrow. I've been in that area at 4 a.m. over 1,000 times now, so I'm very used to the norm. And this was the first experience like this that I've had. The context to this too is that I drive a 5-ton truck for a third-party logistics company at a large factory with over 5,000 workers. Part of my job requires for me to be the first person on site every day at the logistics area to have materials delivered before the factory workers' shift start at like 7 a.m. Other people usually start showing up at around 6:30 and I arrive at 4 in the morning. Every morning to load and unload my own trailer in a dedicated caged-in area that only I work in as I'm the only driver here for this company, which means that only me and 2 other co-workers have access cards for this area. I won't name the company or the factory that I work in because I don't want this to affect my job, but yes, workers have died in this building from machinery mishaps in the past, and it's been operating for over 50 years now. I have had some paranormal experiences in the past, but really never at my work. It was just after 11 p.m., midsummer. I have a long commute home and I was not particularly tired that night, so I can't chalk this up to fatigue or anything. I was driving down a long rural side road, the farm fields on both sides, and if you've seen roads in northern Canada, then you know that the ditches on the sides are really deep. I had my high beams on because this stretch of road has no lights, so at night it's extremely dark. I have had deer jump out across the road before, but I saw something that was 100%, without a doubt, not a deer. So, far up ahead, on the right side, I saw a short, white figure standing at the top of a ditch, like deer do when they're about to jump out, so I slowed down and, as I approached, I realized that this thing was way skinnier than it should be, like starved skinny. It stood like a baby deer with the same body shape, except its ribs were popping out. Its stomach was very thin, like you'd see with a starving dog or something. It had no tail, and weirdest of all is that its head was almost totally round, unlike a deer or really anything that I'd seen before, and it also didn't have any ears that I could see. This thing was pale white too, like a sheet of paper, and its eyes seemed to sort of like glow or something. It wasn't the high beam's reflections too making it so white, because as I passed by and my headlights were no longer on it, it was still white as snow. But the most terrifying part of all of this was, I swear to God that I think that it had human-like hands instead of hooves or feet like a deer. It stared at my car as I passed by, and at first I sort of gunned it because the sight of it freaked me out so much, and then I thought that I should turn around to look for it. So I pulled a U-turn and drove back quite a ways, but it was gone by now. So then I just continued on home, which was about another 20-minute drive, and I just could not stop thinking about it. This encounter bothered me the whole time. When I got home, my wife, sister-in-law, and my brother were all standing on the front porch chatting, and I immediately told them what I saw and started Googling, but I couldn't find anything, and they all think that I'm crazy. So, if you can identify this creature that I saw, then I would be really, really grateful. I still drive that road twice a day, and I always scan that section of the road now, but I haven't seen it again since then. My boyfriend and I, both 20, were up at Libby Creek gold panning area on the evening of July 3rd from about 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. We met this genuinely really cool guy with his son who showed us how to do it. We just did a road trip and gold panned and wanted to pick it up as a bit of a fun hobby. It was a super cool family, and they helped us for like 2.5 hours in the end. He even took us down to an area that he had a claim on. We had parked to a pullout down the Libby Creek Road where the first bridge is, both my boyfriend and I and the man and his son, so 2 cars parked there. The man started telling us, though, about how him and his son had found a human arm down the path where we were. Now, I know that this sounds a bit insane, but the son swore that he saw it too, and he was only about 10 or 11 at the time, telling us about how lots of people go missing up here in the woods, and no one ever hears about it or finds them again, apparently. Also, apparently, there's tons of people living off the grid that don't want to be found for many reasons up here. The government estimated over 10,000 people after some of the latest wildfires. The guy, he wasn't weird or creepy at all, just genuinely trying to let us know the possible dangers of what's out there. Well, halfway through the evening at about 8:30, I went to grab a sweatshirt, saw a dark grey truck with a hardcover canopy on it driving by with dogs barking. No big deal. I grabbed my sweatshirt and then went back to our spot down in the creek. The man and his son, they must have left at around 9:30, and we went back up to our car at about 9:35. My boyfriend wanted to check out a different area on the other side of the bridge, so he headed down there and I stayed in the car for a bit. Now, it's important to note that this area has decent light up until about maybe 10:15 to 10:30. But he starts walking back up not even 5 minutes later, saying that he got this bad feeling that he was being watched. Meanwhile, when I was in the car, I also had the same feeling. I'm not a superstitious person by any means, or even an anxious person, but genuinely I felt scared for my life all of a sudden, and I had no clue why it just sort of came out of nowhere like that. Well, seconds after he's back in the car, the exact same truck that I saw earlier drives by, and stops halfway on the bridge for about a minute. The guy backs up, kind of blocking us into the pullout that we're in, and sort of gets out of his truck and starts asking us what we're doing. My boyfriend tells him that we're just leaving, and asks if he was the landowner, just so that we can be respectful and let him know that we're on our way out. He says no, and that he's going fishing in the area with his dogs, but at 10 p.m? I don't know. We're not local in the area, obviously. We live over the border in Idaho, in fact, but this just seemed a bit odd to us, I guess. In any case, he got back into his truck to back out more, but then stopped again and started honking at us when we were turning around, about to leave. He got out of his car again and said, "Are you guys looking for something?" It immediately felt even weirder than before. So we told him that we were gold panning, but we were leaving. He starts going on about a campground on the road and that we should go up there because it's private apparently. He was going on and trying to convince us to camp out here in the middle of nowhere. Again, we told him that we're going home though, and then he finally backed off and we we drove away. We both discussed just how we had that same gut feeling that someone was watching us and that something bad was going to happen that day. I personally think that that man had been watching us, or at least me, from down or up the creek at one of the pullouts, and possibly thought that I was alone since he saw me go to the car alone. Then when he saw the other truck leave and it was just the one car, that's when he came up the road and arrived just seconds after my boyfriend got into the car with me again. We both think that he was trying to get me alone to do, well, who knows what. The fact that he saw me clear as day twice when I was obviously alone, that was really unsettling. We also don't think that he was actually going fishing because as we were leaving, we saw him heading down the path without his dogs or even any fishing gear. He or someone had to have been watching us too. Luckily, I had a gun in the car with me, just in case. Now, I know a lot of people probably think that we were just being anxious and freaking out from what the man and his son had told us, but that guy in the truck was genuinely giving us the creepiest vibes ever. I have been stalked and almost attacked by a mountain lion at one point, and I wasn't even as scared as I was when compared to this creepy guy was talking to us. I don't know. It could still all be just coincidental, I realize that, but it all seems a bit too perfectly timed, and the whole thing is very fishy. A couple of years ago, I worked for a short-line railroad in the US. That's about as specific as I'd like to get as well. But I was dual certified as an engineer and a conductor, and on this night, I was working as a conductor on the ground. Having to work the ground, it really sucks, doubly so when it's dark out, so I was already not having a very good night. On our railroad, there was about a 15-mile long section of our main line that went through a heavily wooded area. About halfway through that stretch, there is a stub track about 300 yards long where we would keep storage cars. A stub track is sort of just a dead-end track, but before it was a stub track, it went for miles. It was taken out of service back in the 30s or the 40s because a trestle that was just beyond where the track currently terminates, it collapsed while a locomotive was going over it, killing the entire crew. I had never worked that stub at night on the ground, but I'd heard stories from a few old heads who talked about hearing voices and seeing lights out there in the middle of the night. The crew is still out there working harder than you, they used to say. I had chalked it all up to just an urban legend. I never researched if a train actually crashed there or if the trestle had just washed out in a rain one night. But as I headed out for my shift, one of the most serious, no-nonsense guys pulled me aside. Look, man, all I'm going to tell you is to just be careful out there tonight. Not everything is just stories. I thanked him and told him that I would. At that point, I started having some worries about what I would encounter that night, but what I was expecting was nowhere near what I ended up experiencing. So, it was about 2:30 in the morning when we pulled up to the stub track to pull cars. We had about 15 cars on us, and we were just grabbing the first 10 cars, head up on the track and boogieing out of there. I got off, through the switch, and got us hooked into the storage cars. Once I got to the cut, the back of the last car that we were taking, I stopped to sort of double-check the paperwork to make sure that I was making the cut at the right car. But when I set my lantern on the car, the light cut out completely. The battery contacts on those lanterns really suck, so it wasn't that uncommon, but it was not where I wanted it to happen, that much was for sure. But as soon as it went out, I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. It was absolutely pitch black out there. I was sort of pretty frantically trying to get my lantern to turn back on when I heard a rustling coming from the other side of the cars. Whatever it was walking fast and it was big. But before, I was frantically trying to get my light to work, but now I was legitimately trembling a bit. All I could think to do was to yell out, and I screamed, "Hello," and got no answer. I just heard more rustling. Hey, this is railroad property. You're trespassing, you know that, right? No response, only more rustling. I got my light turned on, and right when I pointed it towards where the noise was coming from, I saw a massive rock come hurling right at me. I ducked out of the way and heard it crash into the brush behind me, and that's when I heard a yell like nothing I'd ever heard. It was like a loud, high-pitched growl almost. Immediately once I heard it, my body went ice cold. I pulled the pin on the car and tried to radio my engineer, but my hand was shaking so badly that I couldn't get my radio to work. I finally heard my handset chirp and I screamed, "Cuts made, I'm riding." And then there was a huge bang. The car behind me was an empty hopper car, and a giant rock had hit the side of it, causing a massive bang. Then came the yell again, "Cuts made, I'm riding, go now." The engineer responded with something that I cannot even recall, to be honest. He started pulling us out of there, and another rock came at me, this time hitting the car that I was riding a couple of feet to the left of me and making a large bang again. Now I heard a human screaming, and I realized that it was actually me. I could barely hold onto the train car as we picked up speed, but then it hit me. In about 150 yards, I had to stop the train once we cleared the switch to reline it for the main track. Well, I got us stopped and practically fell off of the car. My legs were jello. I fumbled with the switch and had just gotten it realigned when I heard that rustling coming towards me again. I scrambled up on the car again and screamed into the radio, "I'm riding the rest of the way, just go now." The car stretched and we slowly started moving. My engineer comes back with, "Hey man, are you okay?" I yelled back, "Yeah, just peachy, just go." As we started picking up speed, I heard the yell again, this time further away. I wrapped my arms around the railing in front of me, and my adrenaline dumped, and tears literally started streaming down my face. I softly heard one more yell as the sound of the cars got louder and we picked up more speed. When I eventually got back onto the motor, my engineer asked me, "What the hell happened back there, man?" And I just said, "I wish I knew." I was practically catatonic the rest of the night. The next day was a rest day, and I just laid in bed and stared at the ceiling all day pretty much. The day after that, I made some calls and got a new job lined up and drove down to the train depot. I turned in my keys, and that was the end of my railroad career since. I never stepped foot onto another train again. Shortly after I left the railroad, though, I went back to school. I finished my degree, and I'm now a desk jockey in an entirely different career field. Although I make less money now, I absolutely love it. I'm so much happier now because of what happened that night. But at least once a week in my dreams, I find myself back on that track. And quite honestly, I don't think that I'll ever truly leave that place. So my girlfriend and I, we went on a spur-of-the-moment camping trip in northwest Georgia for our anniversary one August. We took my 4x4 Ford F-250 diesel truck, loaded some firewood in the back, and some other supplies. A buddy of mine owned several hundred acres of farmland, and practically just told us to enjoy ourselves. She and I arrived at the property, drove nearly a mile from the main road, and set up camp in a harvested cornfield about 100 yards from a large river. The soil was somewhat compacted, but I can tell that if it got wet, it would be sloppy mud pretty quickly. We unloaded the firewood from the bed of my truck, stacked it in a pile nearby, and I began working on building the fire. We planned to use the bed of my truck with an air mattress to sleep on that night. I also brought a tarp that we draped over the sides of the bed, secured with straps obviously. The tarp, it extended beyond the rear of the truck bed, so I got a long stick and sort of secured it to an eyelet on the tarp, lifting it up so that it was high off the truck bed. It literally looked almost like a tent, and we were both eager to sleep under it with the stars out. We had a pretty nice romantic campfire dinner, really. Held each other, listened to the nighttime sounds of the country, and watched heat lightning flash across the sky in the distance. Neither of us had decent cell phone service though, and one of us would catch a bar every so often. But we drifted off to sleep probably around midnight to the peaceful sound of a fire crackling and a cool breeze that was refreshing after a hot summer day. We slept for what only felt like minutes though when I heard the distant rumble of thunder. Not wanting to spoil the evening, I remained quiet but wide awake. My girl was sleeping well with her head on my chest and arm across my waist. I began seeing increased flashes of light from the distant lightning and began hearing more rumbles of thunder. Finally, after about 15 minutes or so, I could tell that the wind was suddenly picking up. I tried to get my phone to pull up a radar, but I had no service. It was then that I decided to wake my girlfriend and tell her that we may need to have to get up soon. She didn't understand at first and wanted me to just relax a bit, but as we were talking, I heard the drops of rain start to hit the tarp. I quickly sat up and said, "Hey, it's time to wake up. We gotta go now, yeah?" Before I could hardly move to get up, though, the rain and the wind just sort of hit all of a sudden, and it went from like 0 to 100 in intensity. I quickly threw on some pants and my boots and leaped from the back of the truck. The field was already very slippery and getting worse by the second. I began undoing the straps, holding the tarp down, as my girlfriend came scrambling out from under the tarp. It was raining sideways by this time, and we began kicking the burning wood out from in the pile in the attempt to extinguish what was still burning in the fire. We quickly jumped into the cab of the truck, and I started the engine. I flipped the switch on the dash to 4-wheel drive high and began attempting to drive out of the muddy field. The truck, it was spinning, and my mud terrain tires were working overtime to get us out of that field. I made it only about 50 to 100 yards out and began to lose the battle. I told my girlfriend that we had to run back and get the leftover firewood to put under the tires so that we could hopefully get traction and get unstuck. The rain, it continued to pour and the lightning was striking very close to us now. The wind was blowing so hard and probably gusting upwards of like 50 miles per hour. We grabbed as much firewood as we could though, and made several trips on foot back to the original campsite to gather it. We were both absolutely soaked and extremely muddy from this ordeal. As we ran back to the truck with one last armload of firewood, I shone my flashlight towards the river, and it was already out of the banks and flowing much faster than normal. I knew that we may have to ditch all efforts to get the truck unstuck and just simply run for higher ground on foot in the end. As we ran back to the truck, I told my girl that we only had one shot to get the truck out, or we would have to leave it. She laughed as if I was joking and like she was actually having fun. I told her, though, that the river, it was already flooding out of its banks, and this was getting very serious for us quickly. I told her to keep throwing wood under the tires as I put the gas pedal to the floor. In a matter of seconds, we had firewood under all 4 tires, and I slammed the pedal to the floor in a desperate panic. The diesel engine, it roared, and I could feel the tires bumping and spinning on the firewood. I yelled, "Good, keep throwing it under there." She kept throwing pieces under the right rear and the right front tires as the truck growled slowly forward. We finally got free from the very boggy ground and was able to make it back to the main road. She was covered from head to toe in mud though, and we were both soaked to the bone wet. It was also about 2 in the morning, and we made our way to a nearby town to find a motel. The clerk at the motel literally compensated us for the room after hearing about our ordeal and seeing us all wet and covered in mud like that. We got cleaned up and finally were able to get some rest. It rained too, until about 10 a.m. that morning. But boy, what a night that was. We went back to the area after the rain stopped, pulled off the main road and walked towards where we had been only hours earlier. And that river had risen too, and was still beyond, where we were struggling to get the truck unstuck from the mud. My friend, the landowner, called me that afternoon too, and asked me if everything went well with the camping trip. I told him about it, and he said that he'd only seen that river flood like once in every 50 years, and never this bad. And well, we made some memories that night for sure, and that girlfriend has been my wife for nearly a decade now. We often reflect back to how easy it would have been for us to have just brushed off the rainstorm and not worried about it. We think about how quick it could have been a life or death situation had we not been ready to jump up and get out of there as quickly as we did. We haven't camped much since then, and the only camping that we really do now is a wall-to-wall carpeted 3-star or better hotel. I've only shared this story with my inner circle, and I refrained from sharing it online because, well, I was afraid people won't believe me, would ridicule it, or react in another negative way. But after hearing many stories here, I finally decided to share one of my own paranormal experiences. So back in 2016, I went on a family vacation with my dad, his wife, and my aunt, who is my dad's sister. We traveled through several places in Morocco, just enjoying the road trip for the most part. One day we had a long drive to Agida, a very touristy spot in southern Morocco, known for its beach, shops, restaurants, and beautiful boulevard. We drove for about 12 hours and arrived later in the evening. Everyone was tired, well, except for me, and so while the others went to bed, I decided to head out into the boulevard and enjoy a drink, relaxing in the warm summer evening breeze, and my dad told me to knock on the door when I got back and he would open it for me. Now, as I was sitting there drinking and enjoying the night, I started to feel something unexplainable, really. It felt like something was about to happen, but I shrugged it off, thinking that I must be getting tired. Around 3 a.m., I decided that it was time to head home and finally time to get some sleep. I took a cab back and knocked on the door. My dad opened it like he said he would. Now, my dad always greets me the same way. He says, "Hi, son," whether it's in person or on WhatsApp or a phone call, wherever. He stood there in the doorway and said, "Hi, son, how was it?" So I told him that it was fine, but I was ready for bed now. He nodded and said yes, and as I walked inside, I faintly heard from behind me in the hallway, "Hi, son." I didn't think much of it. I figured that I was just hearing things because I was so tired, so I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. My aunt and I were sharing the same bedroom that night. She was sleeping in the bed by the window, and I was in the bed against the wall. When I walked toward the room and tried to enter, I suddenly felt a strong force sort of push against my chest, as if something was trying to stop me from going in. I was startled and stepped back, but in the end I just sort of shrugged it off. When I tried to enter the room a second time, I felt the same push again. But since I had convinced myself that it was just because I was so tired, I ignored it again, and eventually I went to bed. Once I was lying down, I fell asleep, but this is hard to explain, but weirdly it felt like I was still awake. Within about 5 minutes, all the lights in the room turned on, and I couldn't move, and I heard strange noises coming from my aunt's bed. I tried with all my strength to look up in her direction, but I just couldn't move a muscle. Then I heard her call my name and tell me to look. I finally managed to turn my head slightly, and what I saw absolutely terrified me. Blood was streaming from her eyes. She was now holding a knife, and she screamed that she was going to kill me. I have never, in my entire life, felt fear like that. I was shouting and begging for her to stop when all of a sudden I heard my dad's voice pleading with me to wake up. I remember thinking, wake up? I am awake. That was when I realized that I was actually asleep because his voice kept getting louder and more urgent. I tried my best to snap out of it, and eventually I must have. When I finally woke up, my dad was sitting behind me, holding me up and trying to comfort me. His wife looked shocked. My aunt was sitting on her bed, pale as a ghost, with her head between her knees. I was still overwhelmed by extreme fear, but also completely disoriented. The fear was so intense and present that in the end I rushed to the toilet and threw up. Afterward, my dad told me that we were leaving the house first thing in the morning. When I returned to the room, my aunt still looked completely drained and unusually pale too. I asked her what had happened, and she said that she had had a bad dream too. I asked her what she had dreamt, and she told me that she saw red everywhere, had a knife in her hand, and felt an overwhelming urge to kill me. Well, we left that house in the morning, and we never did go back. I live in a house that was built in the 1800s. It's a gorgeous home with a really lovely character. It originally belonged to my grandparents, and when they died, it was left to me. There have been some odd and unexplainable experiences in my home, though. Some I have witnessed, and others I've been told about. I am a believer, but I need to have exhausted pretty much all other possibilities before I accept that something paranormal may have actually happened. But for context, my son, 14 months, is in the very early stages of speech, but he is consistent in responding accurately with words that he does know. As of sharing this, the words, or his versions of words, that my son knows are mama, oma, German for grandmother, dog, row, our dog is called Rocco, yes, no, okay, hi, bye, wawa, which is water, and nana, which is banana. He loves to wave and blow kisses, but will only do this towards people and mannequins, which is really adorable. But now on to why I'm sharing this. So my son has started interacting with someone that I cannot see. He becomes distracted from what he is doing, turns to focus on a specific area, waves and says hi. He does this in all areas of the house, but the most common area is in the bedroom and upstairs hallway. Around 3 weeks ago, we were in the living room and he pointed to a spot just in front of the door and said something that sounded like Abigail. I asked him to repeat what he had just said, but all I got was him laughing, pointing at the door and saying hi. That was the first interaction, and it's been happening a few times a week since then. The most recent was on Tuesday evening. I like to take him upstairs about 30 minutes before his bedtime so he can have a wander around the room, play with some toys, and watch an episode of Hey Dougie. We were mid-episode too when he whipped his head around to the door, squealed, and ran over to it. He was waving like crazy and shouting hi over and over to nothing. I asked what he was doing, and he pointed to something that I couldn't see and just laughed. I asked if he was having a chit-chat, and he said yes. I asked who he was talking to, and he said Abigail. Clear as day, Abigail. That same night, I was trying to get him to sleep, and I have him in my bed for a cuddle until he falls asleep most nights, then move him to his cot. This night, he was very energetic, jumping on the bed and refusing to lie down. Then he looked over my shoulder to something behind me, stopped jumping, and just stared at this spot for about 10 seconds. Then he said, okay, immediately laid down and settled. Part of me wants to attribute this behavior to a young child exploring his imagination, but the consistency and how he interacts with Abigail seems to be a bit more than just make-believe. Plus, he just doesn't say any words with more than 2 syllables right now, so it's confused me as to why the next step in his speech is to start with Abigail. The other thing that makes me wonder if Abigail could be real is stories that I have heard from my grandparents and a couple of friends. You see, my grandfather saw a little girl with blonde hair in a blue dress at the end of his bed 3 or 4 times. He said that she looked about 5 years old, and he described the experiences as he would wake up and sort of notice a child standing in his room. He'd take a moment to focus, and once he could properly look at her, she would giggle and run out of the room. My grandmother thought that she caught a glimpse of her in the upstairs hallway once, but said that she ran down the stairs before she could really see her. Honestly, I put these 2 things down to my grandfather just sort of having woken up, so he was probably seeing things in his sleepy state. My grandmother had been told the stories by my grandfather, so she was already primed to see what she could describe as the little girl. A friend of mine once told me that he felt weird being in the house because he kept seeing a child-sized shadow running past the living room. That one was certainly a bit harder to explain too, considering that he didn't know the stories of what my grandparents had seen, and I never saw the shadow either and never said anything, so that one's certainly a bit harder to explain. But the other thing is that my son doesn't know any children called Abigail. My teenage niece is called Abby, but she's never referred to her by her full name. Plus, she lives in a different country and he's met her like once. I even went as far as to check with his childminder to see if any of the other kids that she has might have that name, but no. So, what do you guys think of the chances that my son has made friends with, well, a ghost? My name is Nolan and I'm 24 now, but when all of this happened, I was just 12. So I live not far from Paris, but I've loved traveling since I was a kid. For 5 summers straight from 2009 to 2013, my mum signed me up for summer camps every July too. Those camps were amazing. I traveled all over France, camping, hiking mountains, doing caving and rope courses. So many fun activities since I was young, and I loved every minute of it. But then came 2013, the worst of all the camps that I had ever been to. That summer the camp was on Isle d'Oloron, an island in western France connected to the mainland by a big bridge. The island, it's known for being really hot in the summer. Amazing local food, nice beaches, and especially a famous monument called Fort Bjord, an old prison in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that once held criminals. The camp, it was set in the middle of nature. Imagine a group of small buildings arranged in a sort of L shape, and on one side was the entrance, and on the other was just thick bushes leading into the forest. The buildings, they were divided between the kids' dorms, the laundry room, the dining hall, and the instructors' dorms. At that time in my life, I was pretty rebellious and I didn't like to follow instructions. 2 of my friends, Malik and Enzo, they came with me, so we were all set for a crazy time, maybe too crazy. Everything was fine during the first 6 days of camp, and we had a lot of fun. But on the 7th day, things started going wrong, mostly because of us, to be honest. That night, we had a campfire game session, playing games like Uno from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. And after that, the instructors announced that it was lights out and everyone went to their rooms. Malik, Enzo, and I shared a room, so we brushed our teeth and we went to bed too. About 25 to 30 minutes later, the instructors turned off all the lights. Now, around midnight, I came up with a terrible idea. A night walk in the forest with my 2 friends, even though we were only 12 or 13 years old. We opened our window, looked around quickly, and saw that none of the instructors were awake. They all seemed to be asleep, probably too tired after the day's activities. So we quietly crossed the camp courtyard, sneaking past the buildings, and entered the bushes on the far side of the site. We walked about 10 to 15 minutes into the forest. While walking, I was joking around and trying to scare my friends with some creepy stories, when suddenly, we arrived at the fence of an old abandoned house. The house looked really run down and creepy, like something out of a witch's story. Being young and stupid, though, we decided to at least go into the garden, and to our surprise, the gate was open, so we stepped inside. As soon as we started walking in the garden, we heard a huge, very loud scream coming from a man, it seemed, with a deep and scary voice. We were terrified at first, and we couldn't understand what he was yelling at. Then the front door of the house under the porch opened, and we saw a man running toward us. We panicked, nearly crying, and instantly reopened the gate behind us. We ran as fast as we could back toward the camp. We managed to get back in one piece, but unfortunately woke everyone up in the middle of the night, so stressed and scared and panicked that I was crying a lot. The instructors obviously scolded us for being so reckless and dangerous, but it was clear from our faces that we weren't making it up. We told them what happened, and finally we went back to our rooms. I couldn't sleep that night at all, and I just kept replaying the scene in my head. One detail stuck with me, though, thanks to the moonlight. The man seemed to be limping and also seemed to have a wooden leg. Even so, though, he ran really quickly. I don't know why, but I had a very bad feeling about the whole thing, too. In any case, it was on the 9th day, the last day of camp, that we were outside doing various activities when the instructor asked us if we had our swimsuits ready because we were going to go to the pool that day. I said no and that I needed to go and get mine from my room, so I ran alone to the dormitory, about 10 meters away. I opened my door and then closed it behind me, and for some reason I didn't turn the light on. Inside the room, since we had the shutters closed, it was almost completely dark. There was a little bit of light and you could just see a few things, but at that moment, about 5 meters from me, I saw a tall human-like figure standing still. I couldn't see its face, just the silhouette. I didn't understand what was happening, but I froze and I didn't move. Probably 5 or 6 seconds passed when I suddenly turned, I opened the door, and ran outside screaming that somebody was in my room. I ran crying towards the center of the camp where everybody was. An instructor immediately went with some colleagues to check my room, but it was empty. The instructors called everyone to come to my room, though, because apparently they had found something. On the floor was a piece of paper with the words, "I will come back tonight," written on it. They called everyone over because they suspected that somebody else had written it. I literally froze and I began to cry as much as before. That night, the instructors stayed in pairs outside of every door, so nobody could enter any rooms. Thankfully, no one came back to my room that night too. We left camp the next day, but because of those incidences, I never went back to camp after I was 13. In fact, it took me a long time to want to travel again with friends or family to places that I didn't know. It wasn't until I was about 19 that I dared to even go on vacation again. When I told my mum about what happened, she told me that I was incredibly stupid, but brave at the same time for my age, and that I did the right thing because whoever was in that room that night didn't mean well, especially with that note left behind. Looking back on it all, I realized just how stupid it was to go into that forest in the first place. I don't know why we went into that forest, to be honest, but it was dumb. Even 12 years later, though, questions still haunt me. Like, who was that person in my room? Was it the same man who chased us in the forest that night? What did he want? And how did he even find my room? Those questions kept me awake many nights, and I had a lot of nightmares about this. Like I said at the start, even if I mostly laugh about it now, sometimes I admit that I still get anxious over small things when I think about it. When I was around 14 or 15, my dad, little brother, and grandparents took a road trip from our home in Texas to Tennessee to visit family. We stayed at this charming little bed and breakfast back before Airbnb was even a thing. It was an old yellow Victorian house perched on a hill with a river winding through the backyard. I still remember how cozy it felt. The inside had delicate pink wallpaper, creaky wooden floors, and this gorgeous clawfoot tub in the bathroom. It was one of those places where the hosts live next door as well and make you breakfast in the morning and all that. I loved it immediately. Now, when we weren't with our relatives, my little brother and I spent our time exploring the grounds for the most part, skipping rocks and splashing around in the shallow parts of the river. It was peaceful, quiet in the way that old places sometimes are, like the air itself had settled long ago. That night, after a long day of hiking and visiting places, we all turned in early. My brother, he made a pallet on the floor in my grandparents' room, and I was in my dad's room on a metal folded cot at the foot of his bed. I remember just how heavy my limbs felt that night. I barely managed to pull the covers over myself before I was out cold, in fact. I don't even remember my dad turning off the light. But sometime later, I woke up. There was no sudden noise, no breeze, just I was awake. I blinked a few times, adjusting to the dim light spilling in through the thin curtains. At first, everything seemed completely normal. I could see the room in perfect detail. Dad was still sleeping. His wallet and belt were on the dresser just like before. My jacket was still hanging on the hook above my shoes near the door. Nothing had moved. I wasn't sure why I had woken up. Maybe I needed a drink of water or to use the bathroom, but as I tried to move, I suddenly realized that I couldn't, not even a finger. I then remember this creeping feeling starting in my chest, like a cold knot tightening. I tried again, harder this time. Nothing. My arms were lead. My legs wouldn't respond. I couldn't even turn my head, in fact. I wasn't dreaming, too. I could see everything. Every shadow, every detail, but the stillness in the room suddenly felt wrong. Like time had slowed, but hadn't stopped, maybe. And that was when I noticed them. Two figures, short, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall, stood silently beside my dad's bed. He definitely had not been there before because I would have noticed. But they were definitely not human. Their bodies were dark green but shimmered strangely in the light, almost glittery. Their heads were elongated, shaped kind of like the aliens from Alien vs. Predator. But this was years before I even saw those movies. When I did finally watch them, I remember freezing, the memory crashing back like a wave. These figures looked just like that. Tall, narrow skulls with no visible mouth or eyes, at least not in the way that we have them. Each of them held something too, tools or weapons, I couldn't tell. But they were the same green glittery color, shaped like guns I guess, but smoother, like they'd been carved from the same strange material as their bodies perhaps. They didn't speak aloud, but weirdly I could still hear them. Like they were placing the thoughts directly into my mind. One of them, standing closest to my dad, said, "Okay, now we just need this one." The other replied, "I've already done the 2 in the other room." I felt my heart start to pound in my chest. My grandparents, my little brother. The second one turned toward me. "What about this one?" it asked. The first one sounded irritated. "We don't need that one, you know that, just the males." It was so casual, dismissive, like I was just extra. But the second one didn't stop looking at me. "It can see us, you know." The first one shrugged. "It doesn't matter, but hurry up and do it if you must." And the second one began walking toward me. I was screaming with everything that I had inside, Every part of me wanted to run, to scream, to throw something, but I was completely frozen, completely helpless. All I could do was stare at this thing as it approached me, calm and silent. And I could have sworn that I suddenly saw a mouth and it smiled. Just a little, but like it enjoyed that I was afraid. I fought harder than I had ever fought in my life to move, to blink, to make a sound, but nothing happened. And then, nothing. The next thing that I remember was sunlight coming through the window. My body was drenched in sweat. I felt like I hadn't slept at all, like I'd been awake the whole night, trapped in that room, in that moment. I tried to tell my family that I'd had a weird dream, but no one had experienced anything strange, so no one believed me. We stayed at that house for a few more days, and I barely slept another hour while we were there. I kept waiting for something else to happen, but it didn't. Still, I couldn't have been more relieved when we packed up and we finally drove away. It's been nearly 25 years since that trip, but I can still picture every inch of that room. The wallpaper, the exact hook my jacket hung from, my dad's belt buckle on the dresser, and obviously them too. The way they looked, the sound of their voices in my head. I've had dreams since then, nightmares even sometimes, but nothing has ever felt as real as that night in that little yellow house. I grew up in a very old house in the Midwest that my parents got for a steal. It was originally built as a hotel, and the seller was very motivated to get rid of it. Growing up, weird little things happened all the time. The typical malarkey that is easy to ignore for years and years, footsteps, strange shadows, the feeling of being watched or followed, swearing that you see someone in the room right as you wake up, the room in the basement that chills your blood every time for no reason, the occasional hard-to-explain moments. I moved to the West Coast in my 20s for school and self-discovery, and during a visit from my family, my sister told me that they had met a ghost in the house. Obviously, as you can probably imagine, I was pretty skeptical about that, but my entire family backed her up. She was apparently in her room and her radio had been acting up, so just on the off chance she said, "Okay, if you're a ghost, could you just please stop it?" The radio turned off. She waited a moment and then said, "Wait, if you are a ghost, turn it on." And the radio turned on. After some experimentation, they devised a system of communication apparently. Volume up was yes, volume down was no. The digital readout on the volume was 0 to 30, so 1 was A, 2 was B, 3 was C, and so on. If the radio turned off, then it was a sort of hard no or off-limits question. Through this system, the ghost had explained that he wanted to be called Jason. He had died in the house in 1905 at age 5 when he was sick, and he lived in the house alongside of us with his kind mother and evil father. When they asked if he loved his father, the volume went to 0 and turned off. In fact, he refused most questions about his father. Apparently, he was the cause of the more malevolent experiences that people had had in that house. I was definitely intrigued, and went back home that year to visit for a chance to experience this all for myself. However, when I arrived, Jason refused to interact with me. I would leave the table and the radio would pop on. My sisters would call me back and the radio would turn off instantly. He apparently didn't want to have anything to do with me. As I thought about this, I remembered an experience that I had moving to the West Coast. I had been lying in bed one night when I felt a hand ruffle my hair playfully. I freaked out, I shot out of bed, turned on the light, puffed out my chest and overconfidently yelled, "You don't know who I am or what I'm capable of. If you try that again, you'll regret it. Don't you dare mess with me." And then several picture frames on my desk flew off onto my floor belligerently. I stayed at a friend's house that night. One night on my trip after Jason refused to talk to me, I spoke out loud. "Hey, I'm sorry if it was you who I yelled at that one night. I bet you were trying to play or introduce yourself to me and I got scared. I didn't need to be so mean to you and I understand if you don't want to talk to me." The radio then turned on. "Hey, are you Jason that I've heard about so much?" The volume went up. "Did I yell at you the night before I left?" The volume went up again, and then went back down to a reasonable level. "I'm sorry about that. Can we be friends?" The volume went up again. Honestly, it was incredible. He had introduced himself to several family friends as well. To prove that he wasn't some sort of hacked radio, he would do additional tasks too. He would ring our doorbell, he would push crayons around the table. He even did a really incredible trick for us. You see, while asking about the logistics of being a ghost, he had volume upped that he would travel anywhere almost instantly. To test it, we called up a family friend on the West Coast. This friend put out a newspaper on their kitchen table. Jason then visited them and came back to set the volume to the date of the paper. The radio turned off for a moment, then seconds later it set the volume to 17. The friend said, "So close, the paper was for the 18th. But Jason was not convinced. Volume up, volume down, 17. Volume up, volume down, 17 over and over again. The friend checked again and apologized. "Oh no, he's right. I misremembered. It's the paper from the 17th. Strangely, he refused to answer questions about God or religion. He gave us a few answers that contradicted as well. He told us that he didn't need to sleep, but that he had told my sister a few months earlier that he did. One thing he seemed to know was how long he would be there, though the volume Ouija system that he told my sister he would be around until her 28th birthday, then his family would move on to the next phase. At the time, this was a couple of years into the future, and sure enough, we never heard from him after that. During his time with us, though, he would occasionally visit our dreams too. We would have these extremely realistic dreams where a boy in a white hooded robe would say hi to us, ask to play hide and seek with us, or ask us questions about ourselves. Then he would confirm with my sister that he had visited us. He used the radio primarily, but in the final year he got a bit better at manipulating other electronics too. He could make printers print messages, he could manipulate televisions, he even sent us texts in the last few months. My mother had texted me, "I see you, haha," when I was back in the West Coast a couple of years after all of this. I texted her back, "Did you come out here to visit? Where are you?" But she was confused. She said that she was in the Midwest at home, and her phone had no evidence of sending a text with that message to me. I texted back, "I think Jason sent me a message. Hi Jason," and I got a reply, "Hi" again, not from my mum. My sister even once got a call with a picture of Obama and the caller ID saying Mr. President, but there was nobody there when she answered, and apparently no callback number. The radio confirmed with a volume up that Jason was goofing around apparently. It was a wild few years with that crazy kid haunting our devices. My family still has that radio out, just in case, but it hasn't turned on in years. My sister is now well into her 30s, and look, I know that this will be met with a lot of skepticism. Believe me, I understand. Even I was very skeptical until I was able to meet him myself. However, I think it's finally time to share this and to also answer some questions that people might have about it. So, that's why I'm here. If you have any questions, then please do drop them below. Also, here's some answers to some other basic questions that I've received before. So, does my family still live in this house? Yes, they do. My mum and sister are around, and there has been no communication or experiences from Jason or the father since my sister turned 28. Do I realize that Jason is a demon or a lying spirit, a malevolent entity sent to trick me? Maybe. We haven't ruled that out either, but it felt pretty chill, I guess. Yes, I get that that could be part of it, but I don't know. It's hard to say. How did the parents die? It's unclear to us, but I wish we had found more info on them too. Why didn't I record it? We tried, believe me. Electronic recording was interfered with or glitched every single time though. Jason just didn't want to be recorded, I guess. Camcorders glitched, phone video didn't save or seemed to be immediately deleted. Even audio recordings didn't work around the radio when he was active. Did we ever investigate the history or death records of the house? Did a boy named Jason actually live and die there? We did actually. And we did actually find a record of a death of a 5-year-old boy from illness. But his name was not Jason though. But everything else was in line with what he told us, just not the name. How did a 5-year-old know how to read, write, and spell? Honestly, I have no clue. But he could. I personally always figured that he had picked up some tricks in the afterlife, but who knows? Others have theorized that if his family had this property at that time, that they might have been, well, socio-economically at the top of the class back then. He might have received a better education than most kids at the time, but again, I really don't know. Do you expect us to believe this? Where's your proof? I expect that some people will believe and some won't, and that's honestly fine by me. I'm not here to prove it, I just thought that it was a cool experience and I figured that some others would enjoy knowing about it too. Back in 2023, me and my partner were both living at his mum's house. Most days we'd get home from work about 5 p.m, get dressed, and then we would go to these woods in the hills just outside of the town that we live in. For context, these woods as a whole are 12 miles long and 4 miles wide. There's breaks in the woods of farmland and fields creating separate woods over these hills with different names. You can walk through these woods if you want to. There's paths winding through most of the woods as trails, and if you want to, you can walk over the span of the hills from one side to the other. You can if you really want to, but most of it's through the woods and uphill if you're coming from the south, so most people don't. The one that we always went to is called Wind Down Woods. So, me and my partner, we would go to these woods nearly every day after we finished work, just to go for a walk or a smoke or maybe even both. We went about doing our usual routine, walking around and talking about our days, following the trail in these woods that loops around a large set of trees, with more around you on the outside too. It would kind of look like a messed up donut from a bird's eye view, I guess. Anyway, we were walking on the path that takes you back up towards the top of the woods. That path also takes you down towards the car park once you get to the meeting point of all the paths together. When we see this man in the distance walking down the path at Point B. Point B are one of the trails that just goes up into the woods beyond Winedown. We've still got to get to the meeting point of all the paths to get back to the car, and at this point he's pretty far away from us still, but I just had a bad feeling though, because the first thing that I noticed about this man when we got closer was that he was wearing office shoes and carrying a pair of hiking boots whilst seemingly on a walk in the woods. We were talking about this as we were walking up and sort of laughing about how strange it was. The guy was walking faster than us as he was going downhill and reached the meeting point of the paths a few minutes before we did, but we could see him the whole time. When we got to the meeting point of the paths, all he did was sort of, well, stand there. He didn't do anything. He just sort of stood and was looking around. I had a really bad feeling at this point, as he didn't even look like he was lost. He just looked like he was waiting for something. Me and my partner were pretty weirded out at this point and were thinking about turning around and heading back down into the woods and going back around the long way, just to get away from this guy's weird vibes. In the end though, we decided that walking back down into the woods would ultimately look way too suspicious, as the man had definitely seen us walking up the path towards him, the same time that we'd seen him walking down. So we just kept walking up, and the whole time this guy was still just standing there, looking around with these shoes in his hands. Having no other choice than to walk past this guy to get to the path down to the car park, we went up and we went past him. Getting close to him, I saw something that worried me more than it weirded me out. The guy had a backpack on and there was a handle coming out of it. 100% the handle of a hammer Or maybe an axe. I knew it couldn't have been anything else. He hadn't been on a phone all that time that we'd seen him, not even when he was loitering around. Just more and more stuff adding up and freaking a man out. But as we walked past him and started down the path towards the car park, the guy decides now that he knows where he needs to go without getting a phone out or a compass or anything, and starts walking down behind us. I was freaking out, and so was my partner, who doesn't usually get paranoid about stuff like this because I do it all the time for, well, no reason really. But there was something about this guy that just wasn't right. Also, there were no other cars in the car park except for mine, so he had no real reason to be walking out there. We were walking as fast as we could without running away from this guy, and after what felt like a lifetime, we got to the car, locked the doors, and we drove off. I didn't even look back. To this day, I think about this guy and how strange he was acting, but then again, I think about how strange we were probably acting, and maybe the poor guy was simply on a walk. Anyway, cut to just the other week, and me and my partner are at our friend's house for their birthday, just hanging out, meeting their other friends that we haven't met before, having a blast. But as usual with every small group hangout, it got late and we started talking about weird experiences that we had and spooky encounters. Obviously, we told everyone about our encounter with the really strange man in the woods. A couple of the girls at this hangout, they work at a reserve called Finn Court. It's one of the woods in the hills that I've been talking about, and they seemed pretty rattled by the story that we had told, and said that they had one that would make it worse, but they had to tell the group now. Plus, we needed to hear this, apparently. So one evening at work, E was on a closing shift with her manager, and they'd been cleaning up the cafe and doing final checks when E's manager tells her that he's going to do the rest by himself and that she could just go home. Who doesn't want to hear that, right? So off she goes to her car, sits there a little bit to chill and roll a cigarette before driving home, and later that night she gets a text saying, "Don't ask, just don't come into work tomorrow." He finds out that after she left work, her manager had finished cleaning up like he said and gone to his car to leave. And getting into his car, a man approached him from out of the woods and started wrestling with him to try to steal his car keys. Managing to get the man off and get into his car, the manager drove away and instantly called the police. After talking to the police, they connected some dots of a call that they'd had earlier that evening from a concerned neighbor living in a village a couple of miles from Finn Court, reporting a suspected burglary of one of her neighbors. Another call from a mental health institute in town about as far away as ours from these woods from the opposite direction, saying that one of their patients had escaped. And it turns out, after the police put the whole story together, that this man had escaped, got a haircut, and then walked miles to this village in the middle of nowhere, broke into this house that he thought was abandoned. It was actually the home of an elderly couple. The man was completely disabled and wheelchair-bound, and his carer was his wife. And the man actually murdered the elderly lady and just left the man in the house before leaving and walking into the woods, wandering around them and looking for someone with a car that he could steal from. That's when he ended up at Finn Court and tried to take E's manager's car, running off into the woods again to find somebody else. And me and my partner, we are very sure that this is the same man that we saw acting suspicious at Winedown all that time ago, as their story was from the same month as ours, and the time frames matched up perfectly to when we would have seen him after he had tried to steal the manager's car and ran back off into the woods again. The police actually caught this guy the next day as well, just wandering around in the woods up there. He was following us back down to the car as well, but who's going to jump two guys in an open space where one of us could have easily made it to the road? I think he was trying to freak us out and get us to go back into the woods, to be honest, when he stopped at that meeting point and was sort of loitering around. I don't know for sure, but I suspect that that was his plan. Whatever the case may have been, this still horrifies me to this day, and it feels good to get it off my chest and share this with someone. This whole thing still horrifies me to this day, and it feels very good to just get it off my chest and finally share it with somebody else. For a little bit of background, this was at my family home when I was a teenager in rural Indiana. I had already had other insanely weird ghostly experiences at this house and property, and I am all into the weird and the unknown. Although this experience actually gets me panicked anytime that I think about it. I was walking my puppy Apollo by the woodline at night. We had a big yard, so obviously he had no leash on. This tree line was attached to a huge amount of woods. It was pitch black, and I usually am always paranoid in the dark, but I felt really weird that night for some reason. It really felt like something was, well, watching me, I guess. Like the physical reaction your body gets to it, like being stalked almost. I soon realized that maybe I was more than paranoid and started to walk back down the gravel road back home, which was a bit away. We lived in an area where people would be caught hiding in the woods from the cops all the time. It was an area with a lot of meth addicts, so I wasn't taking any chances. And well, I took only a couple of steps back when I heard this giant sort of thunk sound. It legitimately sounded like somebody had dropped a bag of bricks from up high somewhere. The sound came from inside the woods though, and it sounded like it was parallel to me. Now, I had my dog with me, so I was going to yell he bites, assuming that it could have been another guy on the run, but before I said anything, this tall, I believe 7-foot figure at least, comes out of the tree line. Whatever it was, it had sickly white pale skin and was completely starved. I could see its bones poking out of the cloth that it wore around its waist. A human-like body with our hands and feet, but really lanky limbs, and an abnormally wide chest. The face was genuinely the worst though, and the most confusing part. Imagine a deer skull without antlers, but also much wider and flatter on the front-facing part. No indentations for nostrils either, and it was just flat and smooth. Although, unlike a skull, it was covered with some sort of like sickly pale skin maybe. It had 2 sets of eyes and looked to be no mouth. It wore some sort of wooden headgear that I couldn't take time to comprehend. No ears, but had short tangled dark hair on the back of its head. The look that I exchanged with this creature was short, but I'll never forget it. The most insane part to me though is that it almost looked as terrified as I was. It looked surprised to see me and even froze in place as we looked at each other. Didn't reach out to me and just sort of, well, looked at me. The eyes, though, were pitch black like an animal's eyes. Really, it was a lot like a deer in the headlights. My dog, being smart, immediately ran and waited for me at the foot of our porch until I snapped out of it and ran too. Honestly, too, I can't say that I blame the little dude for leaving me there either. I mean, at least he waited, I guess. But I looked back while running and saw the figure fade into the woods, and that was the last that I saw of it. Fast forward a week later, though, and that's when I started getting knocking and scratching at my bedroom window every single night. My window was up high too, at least 8 foot off the ground, and this went on for a week until I asked my friend who lived next to me to go outside and tell me what they saw. I was on the phone with them, hearing the scratching against my window. They said that they couldn't see anything. They thought that I was the one scratching and that I was messing with them, but genuinely I wish I was. This went on for months as well after this, while I had awful nightmares all the time. Eventually they stopped and my dreams became sort of less apocalyptic, I guess you could say. And after some research, I have to wonder, was this a Wendigo? I didn't think that they would be afraid of humans, or look like that. Is it something entirely different? I have no idea. All I know is that I'm very grateful that it all ended, and I've been sitting on this for years, wondering all this time what the heck that was. So I've only ever had sleep paralysis once a few months ago, but the experience has repeated in my mind every so often. I was in bed, home from college. I had woken up in the middle of the night and the hallway light was on. I rarely even turn it on though, so I know that I didn't turn it on. It's possible that my dad did, but that would be unusual. Anyway, peering around the corner is a pale woman with shoulder-length straight black hair. She was wearing a polka dot black and white dress. She smiled at me the entire time, but her expression was slightly uncanny valley, I guess. Creepy and unsettling, but the smile also felt genuine, if that makes sense. I didn't feel like she was malicious or anything, and she stayed still and just sort of watched me. The whole experience lasted maybe a minute before I broke out of the sleep paralysis. The experience obviously freaked me out, mostly because I have a fear of home invasion, but whenever I remember the experience, I don't feel the same terror that I did in the moment. Again, that was the only time that I'd ever seen her. Now, I live in Central Florida, and this past week I had been hit by Hurricane Milton. I'm okay, by the way, just some flooding in the area, but luckily no damage to our house. I was sleeping on the couch because I'm paranoid about windows breaking in through rough storms, and my bed is right under a window as well. I woke up in the middle of the night, and the storm was still going strong. I know that I wasn't under sleep paralysis or anything because I immediately started petting my cat who was anxious from the storm. I looked out of our back door and that's when I saw her standing in the middle of our screened-in patio. She had the same expression and was wearing the same dress. I just stared at her, looked at the lock to make sure the back door was locked, and then back at her again, and she just didn't move. After a little while, maybe a minute or two, it was like I blinked and she was just gone. I've been going over it in my head non-stop, and the only thing I can think of is maybe I had a weird false awakening or something. Either that or I'm going crazy. I don't remember waking up a second time, but I feel like it makes the most sense, or maybe it was like a stress hallucination or something. Whatever it might have been, I would really love your opinions. I consider myself to be a very spiritual person, but I admittedly am not very knowledgeable about anything specific, I guess. I basically just want to be more knowledgeable on why she's visiting me, who or what she is. I'm confident that I'm seeing her for a reason, but I just have no clue why. Some maybe relevant additional context is that my mum died a year and a half ago, but she didn't look anything like this woman. I genuinely don't think that she was a malicious entity or anything, which is why I spoke about sleep paralysis before. She looks generally unsettling, but not threatening, I guess. I really don't know how to explain the vibes. I have no history of hallucinations in my family's medical history or anything. I do have some mental illnesses, but no family history of any other disorders that would cause this. So, if you have any idea as to what this could be, then please, do let me know. I was in my early 20s and went camping with my spouse and another couple. Way up in the Smoky Mountains, about an hour from the nearest small town, there are 2 to 3 other sites, but none close enough to hear anybody. It's probably 1 a.m. and we're sitting around the fire talking, and we hear somebody whistle the Hunger Games whistle 3 to 5 times. We laughed it off and kept talking, figuring that it was another camper out for a stroll or something. We do live in crackhead capital after all, and people do some weird stuff here. But let me set the scene here a bit. So my friends were on the opposite side of the fire, facing the rest of the camp. My back is to the camp, and I'm facing the woods. My dog is asleep by me. It's fall, and there are leaves everywhere, and walking through camp was crunchy. And about an hour or more later, after the Hunger Games whistling, I just feel eerie. Like it's pitch black all around us, and I've always been a little scared of the dark. I turn around and glance behind me, and I felt like I saw, or thought I saw, something white and then something black. I even said, "That was weird," and we kept talking. It had to be my mind playing tricks in the dark because, well, I'm a bit of a pansy, but a few minutes later I still feel weird. I turn around again and my eyes focus on the white and the black. I can now tell the white is the top of a shirt and white short sleeves. I literally screamed, "Who the heck is that?" and flashlights immediately click on. A federal marshal introduces himself. A game warden was with him. I literally saw his white t-shirt and black vest in the dark, and he was no more than 5 feet behind me for who knows how long. Like I said too, it's very crunchy out, and my high alert cattle dog never heard them either. Anyway, I'll cut the end short, but they checked all of our alcohol. He wanted to know where to buy my blackberry whiskey, and looked in cigarette packs and located a roach my friends had smoked hours earlier. He said that that's mainly what they do in the area, is listen in on camps, and they try to do drug busts, that they park way down the road and walk into camps. He said that they wouldn't have even bothered us if I hadn't noticed him, but they wrote my friend a $300 ticket for the roach and disappeared back into the dark. It scared the living heck out of us, to say the least, and I don't think any of us spoke the rest of the night, and we packed up early the next morning and went home a day early. We camp a lot, and 10 years later I still get a little bit sketched out after dark. How 4 people and a dog could be snuck up on in the woods like that, it still very much creeps me out. This story happened to me about 5 days ago. It was on a Saturday, and for context, I'm a 16-year-old French boy. So, I was with my friend this Saturday in my little French hometown, casually hanging out at the border of the town for a whole hour. My friend here is a 17-year-old girl. We were sitting on some big rocks behind the kindergarten school of our town, right in front of the beet field around 8 p.m. The sky was starting to turn dark, and nothing has ever really happened in our town since we've lived here, except recently when a horrific stabbing account happened with a family. It really has nothing to do with my story, but I note it because, like I said, nothing ever really happens here. Anyway, I was sitting with my friend eating stuff like we casually do when we hang out, when suddenly I spotted a man with a beanie. He had his hands in his sweatshirt and was directly walking toward us. He was way too close for my friend and I to just get up and walk away at this stage, but he comes right in front of us and starts talking in English. My friend doesn't actually speak English, so she didn't really know what was happening at the time. This guy comes right in front of me when he noticed that I was able to speak English and tries to shake my hand, which I deny the approach. Note too here that he didn't look like he was drunk or under drugs or anything. This weird guy though starts talking to me, and he points out the field that was behind my back, which means that if I wanted to look at it, I would have needed to turn my back to him. And then he was sort of very insistently saying, "Is that cabbage?" I responded yes, but he wasn't satisfied by my response, since he was trying to get me to look behind me. However, there was literally the other part of the field that was in my line of sight at my left. He tried to get me to look again and again, which was kind of stressing me out because this guy was like less than a meter away from me, which means that he could have done, well, anything that he wanted to me. Then he told me some incoherent stuff like, "My driver told me there was cabbage here," or "I asked people and they didn't understand." Right after saying that, he pats my shoulder, goes behind me, and crouches at the border of the field. He tells me to come to see if it was cabbage when I clearly told him many times that it was. Even though it wasn't, I was trying to get rid of this creep, but it did kind of look like cabbage. Right when I see that I'm out of his range, I say to my friend to take her bag and start running. At first, she thought that I was joking, but when she saw me running, she changed her mind quickly. We were like 20 meters away from him, and he started walking toward us but rapidly disappeared behind the kindergarten school. My friend and I were both really unsettled by this and quickly wanted to get home. We said goodbye to each other and we split in 2 different directions. I needed to go by the elementary school that was right next to the kindergarten school to get home. And suddenly, I see the creep coming from the road that was between the field and the kindergarten school, with his phone on in his hands. I quickly turned around and went to my friend's house with her, waiting for her father to drive me home. Later that night, my friend and I were talking, and we suggested that it may have been some sort of kidnapping or organ trafficking attempt, since it was the first time that we saw an alone foreigner that didn't speak a single word in French, and the fact that he got up and escaped quickly when we started running hinted to me that it was just some sort of pretext to something evil, and to move away with my friend. Maybe he had texted some guy waiting in a car for them to kidnap my friend or me, since the creep was clearly trying to make us lose time with this cabbage thing. But later that night, I told what happened to a friend of mine that lives in the same town as us, and he told us that he had actually seen this guy, that he was hanging around town and acting strange. We were obviously very unsettled and scared after that event. We're okay now, I guess you could say, but I still wonder if maybe that guy was up to something more sinister. If anyone has anything to say to help us clear this up, then I would really love to hear it. Thanks for listening too, and stay safe out there, guys. I don't know if this counts as explicitly paranormal. It certainly wasn't a ghost in the normal sense, because my mother is still alive and, to this day, was and is in fine health when this took place. So when I was like 8 to 9-ish, I regularly stayed up late. I still do, and I think it had something to do with usually listening to my parents fighting and the fact that I was on edge when they were both in the house, but anyways, that bit's not too important. What is important is that this was another night that I was up late, or late for a child, so like 10 or 11. I had a TV in my room that I was watching, just hanging out on my bed next to my heavily sleeping sister. I think I must have gotten the feeling that I was being watched, so I looked over my shoulder and saw my mum standing over me. I still remember this too, like it could have been yesterday. It's such a clear thing in my mind that it makes me sure that I experienced it, and that I wasn't dreaming, but her face was just blank. Not literally, but there was absolutely nothing in her eyes. She wasn't smiling at me or frowning even. Her face was as neutral as it possibly could have been, and her eyes just looked empty. It wasn't like she was looking through me, like some people describe. She was definitely looking at me, and I remember already feeling weirdly uneasy just at this, but I think partly because I hadn't seen her come in. The TV, while I was definitely watching it, was basically next to the door, and I should have seen her come in, but I had been caught staying up late before, and I never ever missed seeing and hearing her or my dad coming upstairs or entering the room. And I wish that I could remember what I said, but I know that I tried to speak to her, but she didn't respond, like at all. And now that I'm putting this to words properly, I don't think that I recall her even blinking once. I tried a few times to get a reply, but every time that I did, all she did was stare at me with that terrible empty look. At some point, I hid under the covers, and I remember peeking out a few times to see her still looking at me, face unchanged. Then I turned to look at my sister, uncovered by the blankets, and I remember wishing that I could have done something to hide her too, but I couldn't will myself to move because I was too afraid, and I certainly didn't want to come out from under the covers. And when I looked back, my mother just wasn't there. I never even heard her leave. Also, the TV had gone black. Not off, but on a black screen, which was weird because I know it played shows constantly, all night, and it had never been on this black screen before or after this. You know when you have a TV connected to do something, then you sort of unplug the thing? It was basically that screen, but there was no connection message, and obviously nothing had been unplugged in any way. I stayed under the covers until I somehow fell asleep though, and I don't remember how long I was awake after she left, but I'm pretty sure that it was still dark outside by the time that I was asleep. Obviously, I asked my mum in the morning what the heck she was doing, and I distinctly remember asking why she hadn't answered me. And And of course, she had no idea what I was talking about. She said that she hadn't come up to see us at all, or even woken up all night. I seriously doubt it was me dreaming or her sleepwalking. It was so real, and while I recognize that sometimes dreams are like that, mine were never so grounded in reality like this, and I just have such a strong feeling about it. She's also never slept walk before this story or afterward, and the fact that she just disappeared and appeared out of, well, seemingly thin air, the whole thing just doesn't make any sense. To this day, I think it's the weirdest thing that I've ever experienced. I haven't brought it up to her in years, but now that I'm sharing this, genuinely I'm tempted to talk to her about it again and see if she might know what the heck that was. This happened to my sister over 20 years ago, but I never forgot this story, as I could tell just how disturbing this experience was for her when it happened. So she and her new husband were traveling around Australia in a camper van for their honeymoon. They were camping in a park in a remote area near the Great Barrier Reef as they were planning to go out to sea it the next day. Cane toads are an invasive species that has an out-of-control population in Australia, and as such people are encouraged to kill them. Her husband was outside behind the van after dark killing them with a baseball bat and a flashlight to spot them, when suddenly he saw movement and heard rustling in the bushes. He shone the flashlight towards the noise and was startled to see a shirtless, sweaty man crouched down there. The man yelled, "Get that torch out of my eyes," and suddenly got up and walked briskly off into the dark forest, no backpack or light. He was freaked out but decided not to follow as he was not familiar with the area. They were totally creeped out obviously and locked their doors, hoping that he wouldn't come back and try to mess with them, but stayed the night as they didn't know another place to camp in the area at. My sister thinks that he was watching them for hours though and possibly waiting for her to go out by herself to use the bathroom. But who truly knows what his intentions were? Either way, it was bizarre that he was the one being weird, lurking behind their campsite, yet aggressively accosted her husband for shining a bright light in his face. And it was the next morning that they noticed that there were several police cars driving up and down the road in the distance. They did go and tell the police what they had seen the night before, and although the cops didn't say, they have a theory that maybe he was some kind of a criminal on the run, which is even more troubling to think about. So I grew up in a small rural town on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia, on a property that had 150 acres of bush that my stepdad at the time carved out some trails for me and my siblings to ride our bikes on when we weren't at school and stuff like that. Any chance that I got, I'd be out there and never experienced anything like this before. So I was the sort of kid who got a kick out of being out there by myself and always felt safe. I was always content with my own attempt at teen verse wild, and I would quite regularly grab a swag, a backpack full of snacks, jump on my bike and find a new spot to pitch up the swag to just enjoy being away from it all. I never felt in danger of any predators, since there aren't really any here, and any animal that would have even remotely come close to causing me harm would immediately dip the moment that they heard my bike, so being out there always felt quite tranquil. This day was different. So it was about 7:30 in the evening, and being in the middle of summer, it was still fairly bright out on the trails. So I thought nothing of jumping on my bike and going for a ride for a few hours. It was along one of my favorite trails. A tree had fallen across it, so anytime that I decided to ride it, when I got to the spot that I'd have to stop and pick my front wheel up and prop it on the tree so that I could ride over it and continue. But when I pulled up to the log this day, something just didn't feel right. I was immediately incredibly uneasy. It felt like someone was staring daggers through me with 1,000 years of rage in their eyes, and it made every hair on my body stand on its end. But I looked around and I didn't see anything. And so I quickly brushed it off as just me being irrational because I had one too many energy drinks. The nearest neighbor or even anyone would be walking an hour to our property just to reach this spot, but then I heard what sounded like twigs being snapped and walked over behind me in the back of the tree line, which immediately brought my heart rate up to 11. I scanned around again and again saw nothing, but this time I just felt like I was in a world of danger and had no idea why. I started sheepishly saying, "Hello, is anyone there?" and got zero response except for the sound of twigs breaking around me. And that's when I heard it. A voice came from somewhere beside me saying, "Help me," but it sounded like two little girls saying it in unison. And man, did that absolutely flip me out. I had never been more scared in my entire life. I ripped my bike over the log and rode faster than I ever had in my entire life out of there, but as I was starting to make some distance, whatever that thing was shrieked so loud that it sounded supernatural. Almost like a person screaming, but at the same time, also like a giant truck's brakes screeching. I just kept going though until I reached the other side of the property and pushed over a barbed wire fence which backed onto a dirt road, and I pelted it back home. The only person that I told about this was my little brother, and at the time he just called me a liar and we moved on from it. It took me quite a while to build up the courage to ride those trails again, especially that one, but after that, I never did experience anything like it again. I would love to hear your thoughts though on what it could have been. Every logical thing that I've always come up with has always fallen short, so I'm out of ideas and would love to hear yours. This happened a few years back when I was a sophomore in high school, probably 2017. My family and I had just moved into a new place and were renting this house. On the day that this happened, my parents were out of the house running errands, leaving my brother and I at home. We were both upstairs in our rooms, and right across the hall from each other, in fact. And while in my room, I heard the garage open. I thought that my parents had come up, so I went down the stairs to check the garage, but nothing. I went back upstairs, back into my room, and began to hear dishes moving in the kitchen. Again, I walked out of my room, looked over the stairs and into the kitchen to see if my parents were home, but nothing. I walked back into my room after this, and a few minutes later, I hear voices in the house. I walk to my door, open the door, and I see my brother standing right in front of me. He also was coming out of his own room. We both told each other that we had heard our parents and began walking down the stairs. Halfway down, we were having a conversation, more than likely arguing about something kiddish, when my mum's voice calls my name. For context, at the bottom of the stairs was the door to my parents' room. They had left the door to their room open with the lights off, and it was pitch black. My brother and I instantly go quiet and sort of look into the room while remaining on the stairs. A few seconds pass and we hear my mum's voice again, only this time it said my brother's name. And at this, not even a moment later, my brother and I bolt up the stairs and lock ourselves in my room. I instantly call my mum and tell her that somebody was in the house. Luckily, both her and my dad were at the grocery store just 5 minutes away. But still, this confirmed to us that they really should not have been home. This is the first and only time, hopefully, that something like this has ever happened to me. My first thought was not that it was something paranormal. I mean, the voice was so clear and human-like, and matched my mum's voice that I really believed that it was her, or an actual person at least. Of course, in the end it wasn't, and she wasn't even home, and neither was my dad. Looking back on it, I never really liked that room. It was way too dark and unsettling, and there was always something spooky about it. But I still do wonder what spoke to me, and my brother for that matter, from my parents' room that day. In the past year or so, I've seen 3 figures while working in a group home. With each figure I've seen, my brain instantly assumed that it was a specific person before quickly realizing that it couldn't have been that person, or that anyone was even there. I'm not the first person to have seen something at this group home. Co-workers past and present have mentioned witnessing unexplained phenomena, with most of the reports being of shadow figures, as in they straight up saw a shadow that moved like a person. However, when I saw the figures, they weren't shadows at all. Basically, I'd seen something and my brain would tell me, so-and-so just went into the kitchen, or so-and-so just walked past me, only for me to realize that nobody had been there. People have also reported hearing strange voices over monitors during third shift, TVs or lights turning on by themselves, or hearing doors slam with no one around to do so. Multiple people witnessed a curtain unfurl itself, and one night, 2 staff were working third shift together. They were both sitting at the table together when suddenly, one of their phones started ringing with a messenger call. She goes to answer it and sees that it was from the other staff that was sitting there talking to her, but the other staff had their phone plugged in and charged in the kitchen. The other staff goes to check on their phone, and lo and behold, it was calling the girl on Facebook. There have been a lot of creepy instances at work, and I find most of my co-workers credible, although I'm sure some have embellished their paranormal stories a little. But my first experience happened probably around a year ago. I was sitting at the computer desk in the living room facing the kitchen doorway. I was the only staff in the living room at the time, so I had to watch over the residents while the other 2 staff were assisting some of the residents to bed. When suddenly I saw someone walk into the kitchen, and although I didn't get a good look at them, my mind instantly assumed that it had been one of the residents. His name was Adam. We only have 3 residents in the home that walked unassisted though, and the gait and stature matched Adam. After about 5 seconds, I remembered that Adam wasn't even home though. Confused and wondering if maybe Adam had come home early from the movies with another staff member, I went into the kitchen, only to see nobody in there. The kitchen isn't very big either, with nowhere for someone to hide behind, and there was no other exit there, so if I had truly seen someone walk in there, they would have still been in there for sure. I thought that was super weird, but I just brushed it off, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me. Adam came home later on and got a bit of a kick out of it when I told him that I had seen him walking into the kitchen while he was out watching a horror movie. Now, the next experience I had happened earlier this year. Once again, I was watching over the living room as other staff were assisting other residents to bed. One of the staff came out into the living room and we talked a little bit before they took some soiled clothes to the laundry room. They came out shortly after and went into the kitchen, so I was going to go back down the hall to finish what I had to do. And that's when I thought the other staff, a bigger girl called Beth, way taller than me and heavyset, had walked past me carrying stuff to take to the laundry room. Again, I didn't get a good look at Beth, but I could have sworn that she had just walked past me. But when I walked down the hall, I almost ran into Beth as she was coming out of another resident's room, within mere seconds, mind you. I told her what had just happened, and we were both confused as she had obviously been assisting one of the residences to get ready for bed. I went right back down to the laundry room and there was nobody there. That kind of shook me up because I couldn't really find a reasonable explanation for that, and it reminded me of when I had seen Adam too. Now, this last experience literally happened the other day, and is what prompted me to speak about it here. I was assisting one of the residents with his bipad machine and getting him ready for bed when I turned and saw one of the staff, Kathy, walking past his open doorway. I remember seeing her pink sweatshirt, one she wears frequently, and assuming that she was going to check one of the other residences at the end of the hallway. When I was done, about 10 seconds later, I went to go and check to see if Kathy needed a hand. But she wasn't anywhere to be found. I called her name and she didn't respond. When I went back down to the living room, Kathy was sitting at the table. So I asked her if she had gone down the hall and she said no, and I realized that she was wearing a different sweatshirt than the one that I had just seen. Still pink, but it was a darker pink color. She said that I probably saw Sam walk by, but I told her that I was in Sam's room helping him to get to bed at the time, and that I had seen her walk by with her lighter pink sweatshirt. The other staff vouched for the fact that Kathy had been in the living room that whole time though, and this instance was the most unsettling for me because this time I had noticed a specific detail, Kathy's sweatshirt. I've only experienced this at work, mind you, and I've never really had any other unexplainable experiences in my entire life. A handful of past residents have passed in the home, although none of the figures I'd seen resembled any of the residents that I had known, or any that I had been made aware of at least. I've tried to rationalize this, but I just haven't been able to come up with any explanations that satisfy me. I get plenty of sleep most nights, so it's not like I've been having sleep deprivation-induced hallucinations or anything. I highly doubt it's carbon monoxide related. I don't believe there are any potential sources of carbon monoxide in the home, in fact, and detectors are mandatory here anyway. I was a bit stressed out on the night that I saw Kathy, but I don't recall being particularly stressed during either of the other incidences. Toxic mold? I've read that toxic mold can potentially cause hallucinations, but haven't really noted any other signs or symptoms of that in myself or any of the residences or staff working in the home. I've always been intrigued by unexplained paranormal stories, but I've also been kind of skeptic too. I've been trying to rack my brain for a logical explanation for these sightings, but can't really come to a conclusion. Like I said, I've only been experiencing anything like this at work, and the fact that other people have talked about strange things has made me think that maybe there is something paranormal going on here. It's either that or I'm starting to have hallucinations, and that honestly freaks me out quite a bit too. In any case, if you have any advice or similar experiences that you could tell me about and how you dealt with it, then I would genuinely love to hear from you. Please do reach out and do let me know. I've never shared this before, but I felt like this was a good time to do so. So, I was with my ex, who was not a good person at all. It was a rough time in my life. I was 22 and addicted to drugs, which he supplied. Though to be fair, I was addicted before we met. His family was very dysfunctional, to say the least, and his father had actually passed away a year before we got together. He had been a pastor, but he was also a very bad person. He did things to his own kids that no parent should ever even think about, but he passed away in the house where these things had happened. There's more to the story though, because his sister had been heavily involved in satanic rituals with her ex, and had actually sacrificed animals in the house. Goats, chickens, cats, things like that. Not while I was in there or anything, I would have done anything to stop that, but altogether it was a bad situation. Now one day, they were talking about paranormal encounters, and as I walked into the house, I said, "I've never really had anything like that happen to me." And well, I guess whatever was there saw that as an invitation. You see, I went to take a shower, and while I was in there, I saw a shadow that looked like someone had walked into the bathroom. I thought that it was my ex coming in for something. I looked out, and nobody was there. I figured that I must have imagined it, but then my purse flew off the counter and hit the side of the shower. That obviously freaked me out way more, and then I heard a loud bang. His mother had two crosses, one on the sink counter and another on the back of the toilet. The toilet and the counter were only a few inches apart, and when I looked, I saw that both crosses had fallen and somehow got caught on each other, upside down, stuck between the toilet and the sink. Well, that was enough for me. I ran out of there completely butt naked, scared out of my mind. Very embarrassing because I'm not someone who likes people to see me naked. But that night, I went to sleep and woke up with sleep paralysis for the first time too, which I had never experienced before or since then. Something was on top of me, choking me, and it was so dark and felt so evil. It was terrifying. Thankfully, eventually it ended, and I woke up the next morning absolutely petrified. I still think about this often because I like to try and rationalize things, but this one I just cannot. Nothing about it makes any sense. I often wonder if there was something demonic, or if there was just an evil spirit of his father there who had been a monster in real life, or something like that. Like I said, I've never shared this before. It kind of scares me a little bit to write about it and share it here because I don't want to bring that energy back. But I also really want to share it because the whole situation was just so terrifying and crazy and unbelievable that I just cannot keep it in anymore. My wife and I have been renting our house for the past 2 years. Sparingly throughout our tenure, we have heard running in the attic, bangs on the ceiling of the basement. I've seen shadows following me. We have heard full conversations outside of our bedroom window, locks on our doors being changed, and other odds and ends which have given us all the spooks. I'm hearing things move upstairs as I'm actually sharing this, but yesterday it has seemingly intensified. You see, when I got home from work, I came home to greet my wife and my 2 daughters. The kids were napping and we decided to play Fortnite to take advantage of the opportunity. When the kids woke up, all was pretty well and we had snack time, enjoyed our night together, and as the night was coming to a close, my oldest, 2, wanted to play a new game that she had just learned, hide and seek. She's very good at running away from us and hiding when things don't go her way, but certainly not while we play hide and seek. When it was her turn to hide, she likes to peek around the corner and watch me count and cutely lets me find her immediately. When it is her turn to seek, she's super excited and really loves it, but she can never find me. She always runs to her room first and goes under her bed, one of her usual spots that we find her. It may seem like something lighthearted and small, but we have no clue where she learned what hide and seek is, to be honest, and how to play it. She's been infatuated with playing it for the past week. Maybe she'll get better at it. Maybe I've seen too many scary movies, but it still gives me the creeps wondering where she actually learned the game. Another weird experience happened though later that night, when it was time for the girls to go to bed. I was on my way back to get my oldest changed and ready for bed when my wife said she's by the curtains, as she had just saw her walk in and they were visible from where she was sitting. I looked and didn't see her there, but she had crawled out from behind our recliner across the room. When I brought her in to change her, my wife had a petrified look on her face. She said she was staring at me with a blank face and stared at me for like 10 seconds and then went by the curtain to the corner as you were walking out. I didn't know how to explain that. Today I went downstairs about an hour ago to our basement to put our laundry into the dryer and to find the 4 bottles of detergent and fabric softener along with a couple of other things that we keep on top of our dryer have all been knocked down. These items, I can assure you, were all standing straight up on the ground, except our laundry detergent, which had been knocked over and spilled all over the ground. I was pretty ticked off because I genuinely thought that our cat may have knocked it all off since he liked to sit in it and look out the window. But after discussing with my wife, she was down there last, our cat had been in our room all night, and all of the items were on the dryer. I went upstairs to show her what had happened, and 3 of the items were back on top of the dryer, and 1 was knocked over on the ground. We had yelled out, "Is anyone down there?" multiple times and searched the whole basement to no avail. We returned upstairs a bit frightened, and searched around our house a bit more, and we decided that whatever it was downstairs, and we were safe as long as the door was locked. We decided to head to bed, and as we're walking into our room, we heard a small girl's voice say, "Hey," coming from the kitchen, and yet our daughters were definitely asleep. We really don't know what to do about all of this, and now we're just sort of waiting to see what happens next, but if anything does, I'll be sure to let you guys know. When I was young, I grew up on the outskirts of a small town in the Midwest, close to the Great Lakes. The town had a population of about 8,000 at the time and was established in 1833. We lived well outside of town, in an area that was mostly either forest or farmland. There was a small trailer park fairly close on the other side of the railroad tracks, built on a sort of raised mound, so high that you couldn't even see the trailer park from the second floor of our house. But to give you an idea of just how remote we were, the half-of-a-mile stretch in the other direction only had 3 other houses total, and only on one side of the road as well. After that, there was a 2.5 stretch of pretty much nothing but trees or crops before you reached the town proper. At that time, I would have called the farmhouse that we lived in a mansion, but I was very small. We lived there for about 5 years, moving in at about the time that I just entered kindergarten. In retrospect, and looking at it on Google Street View now, it was a fairly small farmhouse, probably built in the early 1900s. While this isn't directly related to the events that I'll later tell you, it occurs to me that it might be relevant, so I'm going to include it. So we owned 6 acres of land, and even then I knew I was fortunate to have so much room to explore and play in. The property was much longer than it was wide too. The house sat fairly close to the road, and the mass of the land that had been cleared I now assumed to be used as farmland for crops. There was also a ring of trees around the perimeter, and a well-worn walking path adjacent to that ring of trees. Outside of a very small grove of apple trees directly next to the house, towards the front of the property, the rest of the land was an empty field full of just tall weeds. So, while I spent most of my time playing in and exploring the closest half of the property, I would never really go back in the back acres alone. The stretch of the trees to the north didn't bother me, nor did the patch of trees and thick forest to the northwest. The patch to the southwest, however, for whatever reason, just terrified me. I would never go anywhere near it alone, and even if I ventured that far with friends or adults, it made me extremely uncomfortable being near that forested sort of corner there. I occasionally still have nightmares about that patch, and for whatever reason, it just freaked me out. Closer to the house, right at the start of the path to the back acres, was a massive woodpile that I spent a good deal of my time playing in. It was easily 5 feet tall, if not 6 feet, as tall as, if not taller than an adult, and I'm pretty sure larger than our house as well. It was composed of irregular-shaped planks that were made by cutting the slightly rounded edges off of a tree. I'm no woodcutter by any means, nor do I know the process, but it always hit me as odd that that much timber was just left behind like that. While the planks were too rounded and irregular in shape to be used for construction, that much I could see. It seemed like a lot of timber that could have been ground up to make particle board or something. I assumed the woodpile was the byproduct of clearing the land for farmland or whatever. Again, I'm no woodcutter, but I will mention that there were no tree trucks to be seen, nor were there any stumps left in the woodpile. They obviously must have been pulled up in the clearing process, but no idea what happened to them or why they were hauled off while the irregular planks were left to rot like that. I can only assume that this mini sort of logging operation had happened a number of years before, probably even decades. The planks were extremely old, whatever the case, and weathered from the elements and very, very brittle. Even though many had sections as thick as 2x4s, they were prone to breaking under the weight of my small frame, and if I put my mind to it, I was capable of breaking them in half with my 5 to 10-year-old strength. Now, I only bring all of this up to establish that the land was not being used for what it was intended to be. In fact, pulling it up on Google Maps, to this day, those 6 acres are still not used for farming, even though nearly all of the surrounding plots now are. The house, though, was completely square. On the bottom floor, half was divided between a dining room and a front room. The other half split between a master bedroom, with remaining space divided between the kitchen and the 2 flights of stairs. One of which led down to an entryway, which included another flight of stairs down to the basement, and the other leading upstairs. I don't think it was ever remodeled. I think the upstairs was designed to basically be a livable attic. You went up half a flight of stairs to a small landing, then had to turn 180 degrees to another half of a flight of stairs that led up to a sort of long alcove. From the alcove, you had 2 doors on either side, one to a small bedroom and one to a slightly large L-shaped bedroom. Both bedrooms were equipped with 2 insanely large walk-in closet storage areas. They sloped due to the roof, but they were large enough that my older brother used one as his bedroom, so he had enough space for couches in his bedroom, proper to hang out with his friends and all that. The slightly larger bedroom, that eventually became mine, was large enough to fit 2 double beds in comfortably, plus a large chest of drawers and plenty of floor space to play in. Closets are scary when you're a kid, large ones even more so. Mine was large enough to fit every conceivable monster my mind could imagine in it. More than enough room for Dracula, a wolfman, the boogeyman, and plenty of room for a Bigfoot or 2. My parents, they weren't much for the mollycoddling, and I was expected to go to bed by myself every night. Now, there was a small window on the stairway landing that allowed some light from the yard security light, but when you made that 180 turn, you were staring at a flight of stairs leading up to the pitch darkness where the next light switch could be found. I'm not too proud to admit it, but most nights I made that ascent crying in fear. I also have a large family, but my siblings were all much older, and every year saw another one striking out on their own, and the number of those of us dwelling there getting consistently smaller. One might come back to visit or stay briefly when times were tough, but we went from like 6 when we first moved in to eventually 2 to 4. My father traveled for work, and my older teenager brother spent most of his time out running around. So by the time that I was 9, most nights it was just me and my mum. Putting this as politely as I can as well, my closest brother was much older than me, a high school jock and, well, kind of an idiot. Even for brothers, I can't say our relationship was good at that point. Most of our interactions went between him ignoring me to tormenting me for his own amusement. I tended to avoid him as much as possible because our time spent together was never enjoyable and usually ended with me crying and our mum screaming, "Leave your brother alone." Now, honestly, I still have almost no idea when this happened. I couldn't tell you what season, and only slightly comfortable in guessing it was probably about the time I was 8, maybe barely after I turned 9 years old. The only thing that I can say for certain is that my father was away on business at the time, and while I'd shared my bedroom with my older sister for the first few years, she'd moved out and I had the bedroom to myself. Now, old houses creak, but they creak and moan as they settle. Most nights I'd lay in bed terrified, listening to these sounds trying to convince myself that it wasn't a monster coming to get me. Eventually a train would pass by, and the motion of it shaking the house would always put me to sleep, which is a bit weird, right? So I assume it was a night like any other. If I'd seen a scary movie or read a horror story, I would walk up the stairs in fear and lay in bed listening to every small noise, wondering what it was until a train rocked me to sleep. Barring a nightmare, I almost never woke up in the middle of the night, usually sleeping until the sun came up or my mum woke me up, whichever came first. I didn't have an alarm clock, and I have no memory of there ever being a clock in that room. Total stab in the dark, but sometime after midnight, I was awoken to a sound outside of my bedroom door, in that little alcove that I'd mentioned before. I'd have to say that I was a fairly sound sleeper back then, because I don't ever remember being woken up by my brother coming home, or any other sound for that matter. But for whatever reason, this time, I was woken up by a very slow, very long creak of the floorboards. The first immediate thought was that it was the house settling, and I turned over to go back to sleep, but this time it didn't stop. There were no sound of footsteps, and each creak just sort of took forever. I wasn't actually scared at first, just sort of curious, trying to figure out what it was. But then there was way more noise than the house would make. But if it was someone out there, they were moving just insanely slow. no sound of footfall. If there was someone, they'd just about have to be barefooted or in socks maybe. Just the slow sound of one floorboard groaning in protest of pressure, followed painfully slowly by another floorboard groaning in relief as pressure was removed. At that, I sat up in bed, just listening and arguing with myself. Something has to be there. There's no way anyone is there, though. It must be the house making noises. It was so slow that it wasn't even scaring me, I guess. I was just listening to it intently. It went on forever as well, easily 20 or more minutes. Long enough that eventually I was convinced that it sounded nothing like maybe my brother creeping home late and trying not to wake anyone up, or even someone breaking in and trying to steal things in the dark without making a sound. It seemed very much like the sound of something, though, pacing very slowly back and forth directly in front of my door. The noise would very slowly move left for a while, and then oh so slowly move back in the opposite direction, like it had no destination in mind. Eventually I was convinced, okay, this is absolutely not my imagination. Someone has to be there, and I suspected my brother was trying to scare me or whatever. I went to call his name and found my voice frozen in my throat. My mother was sleeping directly below me and could absolutely hear me if I screamed, and if it was my brother pranking me, yelling would definitely put an end to it. But I don't know, I've just never felt such terror in my life at just the thought of yelling. At that age, yelling chases everything bad away and brings your mother to your rescue. But all I felt was pure dread at the thought of releasing a scream. And then I heard the sound of the doorknob moving, and any doubt that I wasn't alone was immediately erased. I dove under the covers and balled myself up. Just like the creaking, the sound at the door was painfully slow, like a 3-year-old trying to open a door, unable to get a good grip. I could hear it turning slightly, then stopping, an attempt at turning and then release again, just forever as well. I had a mental image of my brother in a sheet trying to scare me, but even at the time, it just seemed so weird. I mean, why was he doing it anyway? Like, I could see him pretending a few minutes, wandering in the alcove, moaning like a ghost at the top of his lungs until he was sure that I was awake, then jumping on the bed to make me cry and laugh at me. But this style of dramatics seemed unnecessary and really unlike him. After easily a dozen clumsy attempts, the doorknob was finally turned enough to open the door, just barely. I could now hear the door barely moving away from the frame, not nearly far enough for anything to fit through, and now came the sound of something pushing on the door without enough force to open it. The door would sort of creak slightly, open a bit, then fall backwards to a near closed position over and over again. And like everything else up to this point, whatever it was, it took forever. Me shaking under the blanket the whole time, mind you. Even allowing for a child's perception of time, I can say with confidence that we were at easily the 30-minute mark at this point. Probably much, much longer. Minimum of 30 minutes from the first time that I heard the creaking of the floorboards outside of my room, to the time that the door was finally pushed with enough force to finally swing completely open. And that was when the groaning started. Let me stress that this was not the high-pitched, ooh, sort of stereotypical look at me pretending to be a ghost moaning sound. This was sporadic, an elderly person trying to get out of bed sort of groaning. When the door opened, I was expecting or hoping for the grand finale of my brother running around, making ghost noises at the top of his lungs. But what I got was a continuation of the slow creeping on floorboards towards my bed, now accompanied by what I can only describe as a low groan. Like everything else so far as well, it was insanely stretched out and was just painful waiting for what was going to happen next. By this point, I was completely balled into the fetal position, trying my best not even to cry or breathe, terrified to make even the slightest sound. Spoiler too, this went on for hours. I'm finally aware time moves slower for kids, but this would extend until just shy of dawn. So even if it started as late as 3 in the morning during the summer, when nights are shortest, and I'm pretty sure it didn't happen in the summer, I don't remember feeling overheated under the blankets or anything. We're still looking at least 2 or 3 hours minimum. In any case, the entity, or whatever it was, circles the bed in what felt like forever, and somewhere I guess about an hour in, it began touching me. I could feel a barely there brush that would eventually really slowly become a very light poke. At this point, I was absolutely petrified. I lay there feeling this for an hour at least, and somewhere before dawn, all of a sudden, everything just stopped. While I allow for my eventually falling asleep, I just cannot imagine sleep taking me when I was so frozen with fear and quivering violently, and I don't remember falling asleep either. Whatever it was, it just stopped. The touching and poking came at a snail's pace, and when I went 5 minutes without being touched, it honestly felt like it was just looming over me. I never did hear the sound of leaving. No slow departure, no creaking of floorboards, nothing. It just stopped. I waited until the room was completely illuminated, not even feeling safe to come out from under the covers when I could tell the sun was breaking, and scrambled down the stairs as quickly as I could to tell my mom exactly what happened. I'm fairly certain that it was a Sunday morning when this happened as well. Didn't have to go to school that day and wasn't worried about watching cartoons or whatever, and started babbling to my mom about seeing a ghost. She was irritated. She didn't get a lot of days to sleep in and wasn't willing to give up her extra sleep for my imagination. She wasn't interested in hearing about it, so I caught a few hours of sleep in her bed with her at that point. For years, I'd tell all of my friends about the night that I saw a ghost, but as I got older, I realized that it was probably just my older brother playing a trick on me. Now, my brother is still a bit of a jerk, and that's just his way, I guess. When I reached adulthood, we got closer and formed a much stronger bond. He's certainly got his own way of doing things, but he tried to be a big better brother after I hit my teens than he'd ever did when I was a kid. But he still revels in the various pranks that he pulled on me. He very frequently feels a need to remind me that at one point he held all the cards. If I playfully or sometimes resentfully bring up some of the terrible things that he did, he'll gloat about it with a big grin, as if remembering better days. So, one holiday when I'd hit my 30s, I stayed late after the family dinner, and it was just the two of us drinking coffee and talking. He, as always, brought up something that he did to me when I was young, tricking me into eating dog food when I was 3, I think, making me lick a 9-volt battery, tricking me into thinking on accident meant intentionally, so it was harder to snitch on him. Take your pick. It's a bit of a long list, but I realized that we'd never talked about what happened that night, so I threw out dressing up as a ghost to scare me that night. And he countered with, "What?" I figured that this had to be the biggest jewel in his prankster crown after all. Without a doubt, it was the most elaborate and time-intensive trick that he'd ever pulled off on me, and I figured that he'd laugh heartily and brag about how scared he got me. You know, and gave him details to jog his memory. But he then said, "I never did that." Now, considering he remembers every terrible thing that he had done to me, and when he was like 8, 10, or 12 years old, I cannot imagine something this big just slipping his mind like that. Like I said too, it just never seemed like it was his style or anything as well. He wasn't big on subtlety, I guess.